All right, we are live here on YouTube, waiting for the main show to start over on blogtalkradio.com. But we wanted to go ahead and make sure to be connected here, make sure the connection is working properly, and we're all green and ready to go. Got an exciting show today.
1 minute until showtime.
Don't have JP Morrell yet, but hopefully he'll be coming in. And if we don't have JP Morrell, then we'll be starting to talk about the issues earlier than I thought. But we have a lot of stuff to talk about today, so stay tuned, sit back, relax, enjoy the program, and join us in the chat. You'll be able to call in as well. So let us, I'm going to mute myself a second, and we'll go.
Your show will go live in 5 seconds. 4, 3, 2, 1.
Hello? Yeah. Okay. Okay, sounds good.
That ballot should have the same power as everyone else. I can't do this alone. I need your help. So please go to stopthecoup.liberaldan.com and make your contribution today. That's stopthecoup.liberaldan.com. Stopthecoup.liberaldan.com. Political advertising paid for by Levelfield. Contributions are not tax deductible as charitable contributions. And welcome back to Liberal Dan Radio, talk from the left, that's right. This is your host, Dan Zimmerman, coming at you from New Orleans, Louisiana. To join the conversation, it's area code 914-803-4131. That is 914-803-4131. If you're listening live, you could also join us in the blogtalkradio.com chat room. Just sign in with your free blogtalkradio.com account. Go to the episode page and look at the bottom, and the chat room is there. And if you want to join us in the YouTube chat room as well, go to youtube.com/liberaldanradio, and you can leave your questions, comments, etc. there as well. We have a lot of stuff to talk about today, but first, this week's headlines. In national news, President Biden is set to sign the $1 trillion infrastructure bill on Monday. In related news, some Republicans who supported the bill are supposedly getting death threats for not sticking with their party. Yet nobody wants to talk about the issue of violence within the GOP. In Louisiana news, former Sheriff Jack Strain was convicted on 8 counts of child molestation after testimony proved to the jury that he was in fact guilty of the crimes he was accused of. Strain will serve life in prison. Now, if only they could nab the priests. In COVID news, Matthew McConaughey has joined Karen Rogers in wanted due to their own science in fighting vaccine mandates. While Rogers has spoke to Joe Rogan, no news on if McConaughey has. Maybe he hasn't gotten COVID yet. Maybe he's all right. And finally, Paul Rudd has been deemed People's Sexiest Man Alive for 2021. I will defer to my wife, who probably agrees with that assessment. And that was this week's headlines. Now, later on the show, we will be talking about Kyle Rittenhouse, Ahmaud Arbery, and those cases. Lots of stuff happened today that I was frankly shocked about of what happened in today's trial of Kyle Rittenhouse. But first, we have the Honorable JP Morrell, who is running for the Division 2 seat for Council at Large here in the city of New Orleans. So thank you very much for being on the show. I appreciate it. Why don't you give the listeners a little introduction and tell us about, tell us a little about yourself.
Thanks, Dan. I'm really excited to be on the podcast radio show combination that you have going on here. My name is JP Morrell. I'm a former state senator. I was in the state senate for about 13 years. I'm now a candidate for New Orleans City Council at Large. In the Senate, I kind of tackled a lot of the issues that I know you talked about on your show. We talked about doing criminal justice reform. I authored the legislation that repealed non-unanimous juries, which obviously is a huge stain in Louisiana that has its roots back in the 1890s, right after the Reconstruction government was chased out of Louisiana. It was an effort by a lot of really old racist people to make sure that black people could not stop the white majority for locking them up in jail, even if 3 people in the jury at that time thought they were innocent. It's something that carried forward for about 138 years until in 2018 I was able to pass the constitutional amendment that allowed us to strip that out of the Constitution. And subsequently, the Supreme Court, after we passed that constitutional amendment, also pretty much said that no state, because Oregon was still doing it, could do it going forward. I did a couple of other things that I thought were important. I ended the ability for prosecutors to automatically charge 17-year-olds as adults and lock them up in adult prisons, which was something that's been done for a very, very long time. And as the chair of the Revenue and Fiscal Affairs Committee, when we were fixing the budget that had been devastated by Jindal's kind of tax and spend, more spend than tax, when he was governor, we were able to expand the earned income tax credit and give something back to poor families that were being taxed into oblivion. But I'm running for city council largely because it should not be so hard to live in the city we love, and New Orleans is a really hard city to live in right now. And I mean that from the bottom of my heart.
Absolutely.
I mean, for a city that's so incredibly progressive, we fail on so many basic levels. I'll give you an example.
Oh, did I lose you?
That we have a trash problem where Oh, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you now. I think I just had briefly lost you, but yeah.
Okay. So yeah. I mean, if you're from New Orleans, you know what I'm talking about. If you're not, we had after Hurricane Ida, basically trash pickup ceased to happen, and everyone in the city level kind of pointed the finger at each other at the same time, like they done it. But for those of us who are progressives, we remember that in May of 2020, the sanitation workers went on strike, and they've been on strike for about 18 months before the trash apocalypse happened. How can we be in the most progressive city in the state of Louisiana, have all of our sanitation workers go on strike, and the city just not do a damn thing about it at all, not step in the middle of it, not see why they were on strike, not address the issues with PPE or having uniforms or having gloves? Basically, the city kind of stuck its head in the sand, and 18 months later, the wheels came off that car. It boggles my mind that in this blue island in the sea of red, we see the council constantly ducking from progressive issues. And as a legislator, I was aggressively progressive, and I was successful even in a majority Republican legislature on delivering on issues, because you would be surprised when you're able to break down a progressive position, down to its building blocks and explain to people, even like-minded, that there's a mutual benefit in addressing it. More times than not, you can be successful. But it's all in the messaging, and it's all in building the relationships with people to make them understand that you're, keeping it 100.
Oh yeah,
that's kind of what I've done my whole career.
Well, like the Affordable Care Act, or Medicare for All, you poll people individually about the issues and the components of it. It polls very high, but you then put the label on it, and they're like, "Okay, I can't support that." So you got to get, a lot of times you got to get down to the brass tacks. You got to be able to say, "Hey, this is what we're actually trying to do," and then get it done.
That's 100% correct. Honestly, with non-unanimous juries, there had been a couple of stutter steps trying to do a bill to repeal it, and they failed every single time. And when I brought the bill to author the constitutional amendment,
right,
then I found out that Antonin Scalia actually hated that Louisiana had non-unanimous juries.
Huh.
And the moment that you're able to go to a Republican and say, hey, Antonin Scalia thought this was dumb, you would be surprised how quickly they go, wait a second, he thought it was stupid too? Let me go read his decision. It's one of those things where it's like it's all about kind of working, you know that old adage, work smarter, not harder?
Right.
Sometimes it's about just finding where the commonalities are and getting people to all come together on the commonalities versus kind of just yelling talking points at them and hoping that one day they understand you.
And I try to do that on this podcast too. Yeah, that's definitely right. So I have, conservative listeners who will listen to the show and they will, they will say that they appreciate the fact that I am not the one who's not always going to bash them over the head, that I want to find commonalities with them. I want to find a common ground. And I've actually used the Scalia tactic as well in other debates, like in discussions of like gun control laws. I'll be like, well, in Heller, the Heller decision, Scalia did say that you can have some regulation on guns. It's not universal or automatic. Like he actually put in the ruling that some regulation on guns are okay and constitutional. And usually, if you could cite Scalia on something, that usually shuts him up. at least makes them listen.
You're you are 1,000,000% correct. Usually, if you can use him as your litmus test, he usually is, on board for it.
Right. And then, you mentioned Bobby Jindal and his spend and not tax, it always bothered me that his rise to prominence was the fact that he claimed, he was like, well, I turned a $200 million deficit into a surplus at running Medicaid. I'm like, okay, so not only did you eliminate the deficit, but you actually ran a surplus in a program that was meant to provide people with health care. Like, why are you running a surplus? Why is that a good thing? Like, I never understood that. But
well, I mean, it's funny. So, but people don't understand. So, Josh Hawley, which everyone knows, Josh Hawley, he's the senator from Missouri, Missouri. I want people that are your listeners to watch Josh Hawley's talking points. The guy behind Josh Hawley right now is Timmy Teeple, who is the guy that created Bobby Jindal.
Oh, I know Timmy. I know of Timmy Teeple well.
Talking points, yeah, if you listen to his talking points and the culture wars and all that stuff, it is very, very similar. And what it was about when we were up there in the legislature fighting with him was that he was more concerned with the appearance of doing stuff than doing it. And a lot of it, I mean, our entire tax policy for Louisiana before John Bel Edwards came in was governed by Grover Norquist with the Tax Foundation.
Right.
And basically, if he deemed that something was a tax, we could not do it. Now, if he also deemed that tax credits for stuff like horizontal well drilling or other conservative things that allow corporations to make money, that these were anti-tax things, everyone was for it. And we ran into a couple of really bizarre roadblocks. I remember that at one point the governor reached out to everyone's agenda and he said, hey, I want to be like Texas and have no income tax. And so he really impressed upon the legislature one session, we want to go be like Texas. And we did our research and we came back to him and said, well, Governor, we can get rid of the income tax if we completely get rid of the homestead exemption and raise property tax. And he said, well, I don't want to do that either. And everyone kind of looked at him and said, well, then the government will implode.
Right.
And he, for a while, was okay with the government imploding as long as he had the talking point to run for president.
Right. Well, Jindal's thing was always the next step.
Turned a $2 billion. Right, well, I mean, it's the reason why we turned a $2 billion surplus after Katrina into a $1 billion deficit, because he spent as if the economy had actually grown, when in reality, post-Katrina, the economy kind of contracted. It's going to be interesting to watch the legislature right now, and we're totally going away from city politics.
Yeah,
we'll go back later, but it'll be interesting to see what there's a surplus predicted for next year in the state of Louisiana, and it's going to be completely related to Ida. I mean, it's Ida money. It's like Katrina money. It's fake money that only exists for a little small period of time, but it'll be interesting to see if the legislature decides to spend it if it's reoccurring money and create a new Bobby Jindal deficit. But no, so let me get back to the council situation.
Absolutely.
As I was saying, Dan, and you're on point on this. It's just we can't have a city that's this progressive and be afraid to have the fights. And we just don't have the fights in the city. I mean, when you talk about the issues that are facing us, like the fact that we can't grow a black middle class, that women in disadvantaged businesses that are minority owned are not seeing growth in this city like they do in other progressive majority black cities, it's all tied to the fact that council doesn't have the will to actually, make those things happen. I mean, our DBE program in the city is a joke. It's been a joke for years because no one has the follow through to make sure it actually happens. And
Right.
it's frustrating because people have seemed to have forgotten that the council is actually a co-equal, powerful branch of government that has a check on the mayor's office, and councils just aren't there anymore. And I mean, the fact that we are a city, even though we're in a right-to-work state where the city government is hostile towards unions, it kind of just blows my mind that we, as Democrats, will tell people all the time we need to support union labor, and yet if anybody in city government tries to unionize, the city loses its mind.
Jeez. Yeah.
I mean, that's what they do. They're as bad as the corporations what they want to chastise.
Right. Well, let's talk about. We brought up a little bit about public works when we brought up like the trash situation, because that's still ridiculous after Ida. But we have plenty of other issues. We have the Sewage and Water Board, which just got raided by the FBI because, and part of the problem is the reason they were raided by the FBI so quickly is because all of their paperwork or their record keeping is on like note cards or index cards in like file cabinets, not electronic. Which that just I'm a software developer by day. That blew my mind.
Look, can I tell you the story of what happened when I tried to cut on the water to my camping headquarters? Because you're going to love this. So I called Sewage and Water Board. My camping headquarters in 2 years. I knew I'd have to get a plumber involved. I called Sewage and Water Board. They said, hey, get a plumber to inspect your building. Make sure it's available to get water. Pay a deposit. We'll cut your water on. So I get a plumber to go do it. Like the next day. Turns all paperwork in. I hear nothing for like 5-6 days. So I call back and I go, what the hell is going on? Why isn't my water on? They go, well, hey, did you bring your paperwork to Hank? And I was like, who the hell is Hank? Like, Hank's at this address over here. Your plumber's going to physically bring the paperwork to Hank. Hank's going to look it over. Then Hank's going to call you when it's done. You have to take your paperwork and drop it in the night deposit slot. And then somebody in 2 days will get back to you on then we will get a customer service rep to cut on your power, to cut on your water. It took me 10 days in a dialect so that my volunteers could use the bathroom.
Oof.
The whole time, Dan, I'm thinking, if I was starting a business like a bakery and I had loans with a bank, I had rent I had to pay, I had workers I'd hired, and I had to wait 2 or 3 weeks to get the water on, the day I open the bakery, I'm already in the red.
Right. Yeah.
In any other city, to your point, it's an online form and an email, and you're done.
Right.
I mean, it's like
crazy. That's crazy. Like I remember, like it took me forever. Like there was a water issue, like a leak, and it's so bizarre. Like I had like a little bit of a like running toilet or something. And all it basically took was me taking a picture of my new toilet box to get them to refund the money from the leak because I showed that I fixed it or whatever. But like just the amount of hurdles you have to go through to get certain things done is just crazy. And then you have constant issues of people getting overcharged for their water, and one that usually I have most of my stuff auto drafting from like my checking, but this one, Sewage Water Board, it's from my credit card because like I could always charge back on a credit card if they do something wrong. Whereas if they have overdraft from my checking account, I can't pay the mortgage. So
Dan, you are a glutton for, you're like a gambler, aren't you? Giving Sewage and Water Board your credit card, man.
Yeah.
That is some straight Russian roulette right there. I mean, I've seen the stories of people I've seen getting overdraft or getting their credit card obliterated because they get one of those random $3,000 bills that pops up randomly. I appreciate the hustle that you live dangerously. I pay that stuff by check when I get the bill. 'Cause I don't trust those guys with anything like that.
Yeah, I understand that, but we also have problems with Entergy in this city. What do you think that the council's role should be in dealing with Entergy with on issues of like, I mean, they're, you know, I was against Entergy putting that, you know, the plans, because I didn't believe the promises that they were giving, and of course you had the astroturfing that they did in the council to begin with, but like, I used to be a proponent personally on the podcast of where the city should own the lines and handle the maintenance, and then just you sell energy on the lines. But if you don't do that right, you wind up with Texas. So what do you think should be done with Entergy, and what has happened with that?
Well, I want to start with the astroturfing thing, because I find it so comical in that we had a similar problem in the legislature for years. When I joined the legislature in 2006, we used to regularly catch lobbyists lying to us pretty frequently, just straight, just making up stuff. And I remember asking the clerk of the House, Butch Spears, I said, can we put people under oath? He goes, yeah, but no one ever does it, because it's like Congress. You got to pull out a Bible and put their hand up, and it's very disruptive and awkward. And as an attorney, I said, well, listen, what if we just put an affidavit on the back of the witness card saying I'm not going to lie? And he was like, we can do that. So if you ever go to the legislature and the House and Senate and you go to fill out a witness card, on the back is an affidavit saying you're not going to commit perjury. The moment we put that affidavit on the back of witness cards, half the lobbyists stop talking.
Nice.
So one of the things I would do immediately on the council is do that on the council chambers. Because imagine if you had to fill out an affidavit saying you weren't going to lie, you'd have had no astroturfing. And I don't know how many people we caught Entergy with astroturfing, but you never know how many developers or Entergy or anyone else is paying people to show up and just say fake things. So you got to nip that in the bud generally, because as policymakers, you're really relying upon people to be truthful when you're trying to make a decision. So that's general issue. As far as energy, I think the council's role, and it's a good thing, is that we are the only city in the southern United States that has the ability to regulate our energy provider directly and not have a state agency do it, and some like PSC does.
Right.
That's not a bad thing, because PSC, one, it's more run by energy than anything else, and two, and more importantly, whenever you have a state body where New Orleans is the minority vote, you're asking for us to be screwed. That's kind of how the legislature is right now. We get screwed regularly because no matter what our position is, majority rules, and the majority is outside New Orleans. I think that the problem with the council is I think Helena Moreno's done a really good job of trying to get them back on track, but for years they've kind of lost their way in that they don't have a purely regulatory relationship with energy. And by that I mean that Entergy is a provider, and we're the client that regulates them as far as what they give to us.
Right.
I think that when you start doing things like asking for energy to pay for things that are not energy related, like crime cameras or parades, you're part of the problem. In that, really, when you're looking at our regulatory authority, everything should stay within the realm of energy production. The AstroTurf fine from Energy was $5 million. In my conversations with the solar industry, $5 million could have given almost every house that currently has panels the ability to get a Tesla battery installed.
Nice.
Could you imagine what would have happened during Ida if all those houses with solar panels that are still enjoying net metering but could go off the grid immediately?
Right.
I mean, the amount of pressure it would have been during these summer months, even during the winter months when we got screwed last time, when Energy messed up on rolling our power out with brownouts. Like, the grid is always going to get more pressure, especially due to climate change. And we should be encouraging people, especially those who are embracing renewable energy, not just to sell energy back onto the grid, but to take pressure off the grid.
Right.
And the council has never really embraced the fact we've kind of partially went half in on solar, but the fact that an average person cannot afford the batteries at their current price per house. But if the council were able to subsidize the ability to buy batteries, that would revolutionize the grid and allow us to even have microgrids within the city of New Orleans. So I think the council, if it has a progressive bent, which it should, because we're a progressive city, and it's going to push renewable energy, I think Entergy is never going to embrace renewable energy on its own. We have to drag them kicking and screaming. And to that point, I think that it's very, very, very important that the council lead in that regard. And in leading, they need to make sure every single charge the council allows Entergy to do goes to the ratepayers. Something that you may not realize is that whenever you saw that power to the people advertising that went around, that really obnoxious stuff that was up there for a while,
right,
the ratepayers were paying for that. It's a pass-through. The council needs to be much, much more aggressive on saying, when Entergy comes up and goes, we want the ratepayers to pay for this, the council needs to say no more often than yes.
Right.
Because it should not be. I mean, the energy consultants that the council has, the law firm, we pay them $7 million a year. That's more than the PSC pays their lawyers for the entire state of Louisiana. And before anyone says, well, it's complicated or so on and so forth, I hear you on all that. But the same token, that $7 million, Entergy's not paying it. Ratepayers are paying it because it's a pass-through. So
right.
We tell Entergy the bill $7 million. They go, okay, and they put it on our bills. Like the council has to be a better fiduciary, responsible agent in saying, before a dollar goes to the ratepayers, we need to make sure it's absolutely necessary. There was a time, Dan, not that long ago, probably 10, 12 years ago, where people regularly got rebates from Entergy because things were cheaper than we thought they were going to be. Over the years, we've allowed Entergy to capture that money and count it as profit that they give to their stakeholders, to their stockholders. Mm. And I mean, that's a problem. I mean, the relationship has to be governed, it has to be at arm's length, and it has to be respectful. But the same token, Entergy is not our friend. Just like the oil and gas industry, yes, it's nice when they pay for things that we ask them to pay for. It's nice when they're cooperative. But whenever you're regulating any kind of industry, there has to be a respectful distance.
Right. And
with Entergy in New Orleans right now, I don't feel like they've got a respectful distance. I will tell you that it's always worth investigating whether municipal ownership of utilities is worthwhile. The challenge is that, and I'm always 100 with people, even if we were going to go to municipal power generation or even switch to a different provider, it would take years to disentangle from Entergy because of all the different bond issuance we have through them. And so regardless of what the ultimate decision will be on that, we're stuck with them for the near future, and there has to be a reset on this relationship, a hard reset. And we need to go back to the fact that you are the utility provider, we are the regulator, and we should have a relationship that revolves around that relationship, not around side relationships like I need a parade in New Orleans East.
Right. Now, speaking of, monopolies and utilities and stuff like that, I'm here and I'm streaming live and I use Cox, and I only have Cox as an option. God. I only have Cox as I don't have fiber in my neighborhood yet for AT&T. So I'm stuck with Cox. I have no options, and their service is terrible. And I live in Algiers, which is even worse because when it comes to like returning power and internet, we're always last. It's terrible over here. But I have no options. So what would you propose to fix issues of Cox and how they offer internet supposedly?
Cox has a functional monopoly. It's not so. The internet in my infrastructure plan, which is very lengthy, and it's at jpmorrell.com/platforms. I have an infrastructure plan. If you really you're a policy wonk, you'll probably read it. Your listeners will probably read it. But when I go into Cox and internet, Cox is a functional monopoly because fiber optic placement underground is actually very, very, very expensive, which is why its implementation is so slow. Because Cox has a franchise over the cable wires on the poles, that's the reason why the only way we had AT&T early on, this is like AOL time, back when internet first was birthed into residential households, was through DSL dial-up, which was awful, as we all know. So the reason why we've had really slow implementation of competition is that when I talk to Spectrum and AT&T about why don't they expand more aggressively, as long as Cox has a functional monopoly, which is over the cable providing on the telephone lines, over the energy poles, so to speak, they don't want to come in here in a hard way. And so part of that conversation revolves around getting rid of Cox's functional monopoly and saying anyone can use those poles and anyone can make investments to use the poles as well. Because there are parts of the country where all fiber optic, Dan, is not necessarily underground. You can run it along the poles and get the benefits from it. It's not as secure, as far as environmental factors, but it's functional and it works. I think the challenge there is twofold. One, you have to make it an open franchise where anyone who can afford to pay the fees to reach the customers, they can compete. But more importantly, when you have an open franchise where people are paying based upon how many customers they have, my ultimate goal is to create lo-fi, free, or ridiculously cheap internet so everyone has basic access. What we really learned during COVID, when everyone switched to virtual learning, is that it really became kind of a situation of have and have-nots. There were a lot of families throughout the city that, because they had unreliable internet or no internet at all, you had parents that were driving their kids outside of libraries to use the hotspots to get their kids into class, and would literally sit out in the parking lot of a library in a car with their 1, 2, 3, 4 kids, all on those little Chromebooks.
Right.
And they have to park there for the whole day so they can go to class. That's ridiculous.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I mean, we did a distance learning. We didn't have problems most days, but there was still, there was times where our signal was, at least, even if we had it, the signal was bad because they weren't used to that many people using the internet in the neighborhood in the day, I think. So I think the bandwidth dropped significantly. So I don't know how much more time you have, but do you have what other, 1 or 2 issues would you like to are kind of on the top of your radar when, if you were going to hit the ground running and had your way, what 1 or 2 issues would you pick out on top of what we talked about and say, hey, these are important to me?
Well, the one of the big issues to me is how the budget is currently managed. The city does the budget once per year, and that's it. The council meets with the mayor, they do the budget in November, approve it in December, and no one tracks the budget throughout the year. So basically, have you ever seen the episode of The Office about the printers and the chairs, where Oscar tells Michael that we're running a surplus, and so there's a big fight how they're going to spend the surplus, because if they don't spend it that day, corporate will cut their budget?
Right.
That's basically city government. Since we're not tracking the budget annually on a monthly basis, we have no way to realize whether or not departments are running surpluses and deficits and to account accordingly. So when you look at some of the things we underfund NORD horrifically, we underfund juvenile court, we underfund, the council cut the funding of the Travis Hill Center, which provides education to kids who are incarcerated. We're not even tracking to see if there's a department that's running a surplus that could make up the money to do that. Everybody shows up each year. Everyone says they spent their budget from last year and they want their new allowance. You have to change that budgeting process. You have to get in the weeds, dig into it monthly, and track it, because the mayor submits the budget, many departments only ask what the mayor will get, even if they know that that's not enough. When you look at safety and permits in particular, and the STR proliferation and the lack of enforcement, that's directly tied to the fact that council does not give enough scrutiny to their budget annually. I mean, they don't even track how many people are hired or currently employed by safety and permits. For those of us who believe in renewable energy, The Resilience and Climate Control Office in the city, when Mitch Landrieu left, had 12 people. Now it has 2.
Mm.
I don't know how we say we're taking climate change seriously when we've cut the office to 1/6.
Right.
These are the kind of things that the council has to really be on top of the budget. The other issue, which I find very, very, very troubling, is obviously we have a tremendous crime problem in the city of New Orleans right now. And the council has largely checked out on their interaction with NOPD and the police and how policing is happening or not happening. That's a real disappointment to me, especially when I hear council members say all the time, well, I can't control that. The city council controls the entire budget of the city of New Orleans. Dan, how long have you been in New Orleans? Your whole life?
I've been down here since '94 when I came down for school. I lived in Kenner for a bit, but we bought our house in 2007 after we got married. So I've been, a homeowner.
94 is what I needed to hear.
Okay.
So in 1994, when Richard Pennington was picked by Mark Morial,
right,
people forget that Richard Pennington didn't show up like out of the sky, like dropped by a stork. The city council, this was like during the largest crime wave in America, and New Orleans was the murder capital of the universe. The city council froze the NOPD budget and made the mayor do a nationwide search for a police chief. The council has the ability, and it's in their ability, that whenever something isn't working in government, they have the ultimate power, the power of the purse, to say, if you're not going to do your job, we will freeze your budget or dole it out to you on a monthly or weekly basis until we see satisfaction. When people tell me that that there's no money for STR enforcement, there's no money to make sure these contractors that are tearing up our streets and abusing people who complain about it verbally on a lot of occasions. When you hear these stories and the council says I can't do anything, it's because they choose not to do anything. My number one thing that I commit to people in this race is, you will have an activist council member who will get in the middle of things and will go back to having fights. Because right now I feel like the council has kind of become a aimless, dysfunctional body that kind of rubber stamps whatever the mayor does. They don't have agendas or plans of their own. They kind of just react to her. That's not the way the legislative branch of government is supposed to work. It's supposed to, when I was in the legislature at the state level, we drove policy. The governor, had his own priorities, but the legislature, especially progressive legislators, we drove policy. And I feel like the council should be driving policy in the city as well, rather than waiting to see what mayors do. So the two things that like I said, that I would really get in the middle of the budget, and I would really push the council to really do stuff rather than reacting to problems once they've gotten completely out of hand, like the trash apocalypse.
Right. Yeah, that is absolutely out of hand. I mean, I was shocked when we got our trash picked up as early as we did after Ida, but yeah, I know people. I've drove down the streets. I saw what was going on in several of those, areas where you just had trash just piling and piling and piling. It's unacceptable. And yeah, the council, like, one of the individuals who happens to be your opponent is my current council person, and so I haven't been too impressed. I'll just put it that way.
Well, certainly, at the very least, you've got a lot of great options running over in C right now.
Right.
And I can tell you, I've been very pleasantly surprised at how engaged people have been in jumping into those open seats to really try and aggressively change things. And I think I live in District D where there's 14 candidates, which is kind of overwhelming.
Right.
But I've met most of them, Dan, and even though their policies are all over the place, they're all running for the right reason, which is because they want to make a significant change in a district that's kind of gotten kind of stagnant.
Right.
And you have to appreciate the hustle in that people really want to go into public service when it's not the most popular gig these days.
I considered it. I'm the most recently elected neighborhood association president. It's just that I can't get my board together, so we haven't had a meeting in years. And I've also I ran, I've run for office a couple times. I ran against Jindal in 2004. I'm just a terrible fundraiser. I just don't know how to raise funds well. It's awful.
I am happy to give you a free. I'll give you a crash course in fundraising. Fundraising is miserable.
Yeah.
But I'm happy to kind of give you a preview. But what I will tell you is, have you ever run for OpDec?
I did, and
For the
I was like, there was like 4 people who tied when I first, like, I moved down here, and like I got my driver's license as the next day, and then I put my hat in the ring the next day, and I think is there 12 from each.
It's 14.
14. So it's 14.
15, right?
So technically, like in normal Louisiana elections, the amount of votes that 13 through 16 got would have been enough to do a runoff for those seats. And I was 15. But for OpDec they don't do it, so I was 15. So I just missed it by that much.
Well, you and I should have an additional conversation about the state. Well, not tonight because I have to go put my 5-year-old to bed. But we should have a follow-up conversation about kind of the state of the party, Democratic Party in Louisiana.
Yeah,
and kind of what we need to do to make it functional again.
Right.
And also have a lengthy discussion about how we can be in a state that has the second highest African American population in the United States, and yet no Democrat be functionally, plausible statewide.
Right.
The only state that has a higher percentage of African Americans than us is Maryland.
Right. That's my home state.
And yet we can't. What's that?
That's my original state. That's where I was raised, in Maryland. So.
Oh well, Maryland has the most African Americans per capita. Louisiana is second, and yet we don't have any viable statewide Democrats at all.
And that's a darn shame. Although
other than the governor, other than the governor, which is a very special case, he gets kind of like an asterisk. But
yeah, well, yeah, he ran up against the whoremonger, and then he ran up against somebody who looked like a deer in headlights in the only debate they had. I mean, he was Donald Trump without whatever charisma Donald Trump has. So.
I think that's the best synopsis of Eddie Risponi I've ever heard. Donald Trump with zero charisma and also the inability to make good one-liners.
Right. It was as soon as I saw that debate, I was like, he was going to lose this race simply because of the fact that he's showing that he's not able to handle. He's not ready for prime time. If he would have handled himself a little bit, he might have been able to eke one out. But it was, I was surprised. And I was surprised because it was weird. Just a side note. When I was on my honeymoon, so it was like July, maybe 9th or 10th or something of 2007, I'm kind of just in a daze waking up in my cruise cabin. And all of a sudden, like in the background, I hear in my mind something about David Vitter and prostitutes. And I woke up and the story was over. And I was like, what? I was like, look at my wife. Did you just hear something about David Vitter and hookers? And she was like, no. And I'm like, I could have sworn I just heard something about David Vitter and hookers. And I spent like all day long. I didn't spend like the entire day, but like every time I could see a TV, I'm like, is the news on? Is there? I had to go run back to the room. I flipped on CNN. I'm like, it's true. And I was like, it's a honeymoon gift from the Vitters for me. And surprisingly enough, he won statewide he run re-election for Senate the next time, but yeah, he didn't. Edwards was able to be able to handle that issue much better than who Vitter's opponent was the next time, which I think was Melanson. But the party is been in a really sad state for a while, and I shook my. I actually went no party for a few years right after they endorsed.
Yeah, you can't ever do that.
I know, but
I say that because I'm going to run after this, but
sure,
it's sort of like how in the legislature. So as a Democrat, we have to stay in the party to try and fix it, because once you stop being part of the party, you're surrendering it to the people that don't want it to be functional.
Right, and that's what I realized at the end of the day.
It's sort of like when you're frustrated, like when your kid's in a school and you're frustrated with the nature of the school, and you're upset and you want to be better, and it'd be easier to kind of get out of the school, but you realize that you're one of the vocal parents that's kind of fighting for the kids.
Right.
And you realize that it would be easier for me and my blood pressure to leave the dysfunctional school, but there's a crap load of other parents who are poor or don't have the time or effort to pick the fights, and sometimes you just got to stay there and try and fix it. So I mean, That's kind of the party. The party is it's challenging, but good people like you, people that want to put their nose to the grindstone, you're kind of the future of trying to fix the party. So don't go no party, because you just give the people that want a dysfunctional pay to play party more bandwidth to do bad things.
Right. All right. So right before you go, again, remind everybody else how they can support your campaign.
My campaign website is jpmorrell.com, and actually, because I was like a pioneer on all social media, all my social media platforms are all JP Morrell. So Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, it's all there. Obviously, I'm number 36 on the ballot. We are on the primary election is on Saturday. Please, 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 please go vote, because they always don't want those of us who are progressive to go exercise our right to vote. And it's really the last stand as far as trying to promote change in the city. It should not be so hard to live in the city we love. And what I always tell people, Dan, is we need to stop wishing for change. We need to finally go and vote for it. And I want to be that agent of change to make the city the more progressive city it needs to be.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much. I look forward to having you back on the show, for if there's a runoff on the runoff, and, for any other reasons as well. If you want to talk about any other issue, we can talk about that as well. But again, thank you very much for being on the show.
We definitely need to have that deep dive on the state of the party at some point, because it's challenging.
Absolutely. All right. Well, thank you very much, and good luck this Saturday.
Thanks, Dan.
All right, again, that
Thank
is
you.
JP Morrell. If you go to jpmorrell.com, that's jpmorrell.com, and you could find all of his issues that he supports and see how to support him in the election this Saturday. We're going to take a quick commercial break, come back, and we'll start talking about the other issue of the day that I wanted to get to, which is the Kyle Rittenhouse case, and some big things happened with it. If you want to join the conversation, it's area code 914-803-4131. That's 914-803-4131. This is Liberal Dan Radio. Talk from the left. That's right. Are you planning a trip to Disney soon? Do you want help avoiding spending mistakes and making the most of your vacation? Then check out budgeteers.com, a new site devoted to helping you get the most mouse for your money. What kinds of tickets should you get? Is the dining plan a good deal for you? Should you stay on grounds or not? Should you buy park hoppers? Many other sites are filled with information about what other people like to do, but Budgeteers is geared to help you make the best decision for you. So check out budgeteers.com or go to youtube.com/budgeteers and help make your trip the best it can be. Budgeteers.com is not a travel agency, and it is not affiliated with the Disney Corporation or any of its holdings. In a world gone mad, one progressive will do a bad movie trailer guy impression to get you to listen to his show. There's only one thing that I like better than the Liberal Dan Radio Minicast. All right, Bill, that's enough of that. On the Liberal Dan Radio Minicast, you will hear an honest discussion of the day's issues, with some personal bits in between. You might even hear what the other side has to say, sometimes even in their own voices. So become one of the Liberal Dan family, because family means no one gets left behind or forgotten. To hear those bad impressions and more, tune into the Liberal Dan Radio Minicast. Talk from the left, that's right. And I think to myself, what a wonderful show. Yeah. If you enjoy Liberal Dan Radio, there's many ways that you can support the show. You can subscribe to the YouTube channel. You can like me on Facebook or follow me on Twitter or TikTok. And you can become a Liberal Dan Patreon. For as little as $3 a month, you can get a shout out. Higher levels get the opportunity to vote on what I do next on the podcast, the Minicast, or on YouTube. You can even buy commercial advertising or sponsor bits. So go to patreon.liberaldan.com and support the show today.
Hey there, podcast listeners. This is Demonox, host of The World According to Knox. It's time for Season 2, where I take you on another trip through my world. The world of movies, video games, pop culture, and more. Relate them to the world around you. Don't forget to leave a question for Marscat, and find me on Twitter by the handle XDemonox. That's the letter X like X-Men, DEMINOX. Now enjoy the rest of your podcast.
And welcome back to Liberal Dan Radio, Talk from the Left. That's right. This is your host, Dan Zimmerman, coming at you from New Orleans, Louisiana. To join the conversation, it's area code 914-803-4131. That is 914-803-4131. I got a big chuckle because I missed, for some reason, Demonox comment in the V Radio, who, shout out to V Radio for, he was doing some coverage of the Rittenhouse trial earlier today, and we're doing some chats or whatever, and I was in the chat pretty much all day long, listening, giving my comments when I could, when I wasn't actually working, but he said if I should have an arch nemesis, conservative Stan, and I was like, maybe that's my alter ego, and Demonos goes, in conservative Stan, in conservative Stan, corporations tax you. So but if corporations are paying 0% taxes and getting subsidies, aren't they by default taxing us anyway? Food for thought. Anyway, but I do want to give a shout out to so Ripley is calling in but getting nothing. 914-803-4131 is what you're dialing, Ripley, because Ripley was going to be calling in so we could be discussing the topics. I'm not seeing anybody calling in, and I might have been looking away. So try again, Ripley, and we will try. We'll try and get it in, and I don't know if we'll have another option. I don't know if you have Skype. I think you can hit the Skype button and connect in as well, perhaps. Anyway, but I do want to shout out to Demonox, the first Liberal Dan Radio patron. Also shout outs to Cesar and your boy Chris for also supporting the show. You can also support the show, patreon.com/liberaldan or patreon.liberaldan.com. Either way, we'll get you there, and you could get shouts out on the podcast, on the minicast over on Anchor. You can also get advertising if you want to advertise your podcast, business, or whatever. Or you can sponsor bits, or like Hypocrite of the Week. Speaking of Hypocrite of the Week, here's this week's. This week's Hypocrite of the Week is Steven Crowder. Crowder has criticized liberal arguments about defunding the police and even police abolishment. Crowder touts himself a supporter of law enforcement, except when law enforcement does things that he doesn't like. Now, Crowder is calling for the disbanding of the FBI. So Steven Crowder is a hypocrite. Prove me wrong. To see who next week's Hypocrite of the Week will be, tune in to Liberal Dan Radio. Talk from the left, that's right. Wednesdays at 8 p.m. Central on blogtalkradio.com/liberaldan. And there you go. And if you are a Liberal Dan Radio Patreon, one of the benefits are, as soon as I post Hypocrite of the Week, or as soon as I come up with it or produce it, it first goes there before you ever hear it on the show. So this week I actually did it on Monday. Shockingly enough, I was very proactive this week with show prep. So there you go. But one other thing I do want to talk about before I do have my most recent Anchor podcast on anchor.fm/liberaldan. And also you can see some of my videos about it that I've been doing about gerrymandering in this country. And I think if you look at the videos that I've made, I believe you would have to say that I'm being even-handed about it. That when blue states do it, I call blue states out on it. When red states do it, I call red states out on it. So if you want to go and see those videos, you could do that. But I'm also doing a project with Levelfield. If you go to stopthecoup.liberaldan.com, you can make a contribution as little as $5 to my Levelfield fundraiser, and we're going to try and do as much as we can to fight gerrymandering wherever it exists. So if you want to help that, stopthecoup.liberaldan.com is where you can go. And I'm still not seeing Ripley calling. I'm still not seeing anybody calling in after. I mean, JP Morrell, our last guest, he called in on the on that line, 914-803-4131. So I'm not sure what's going on with Ripley and why Ripley is. Oh, maybe that's Ripley. Hopefully that is Ripley. Let's see.
Hello?
Is that you, Ripley?
Yeah, it's me.
Awesome. We were able to get Ripley onto the show. So I knew talking long enough it would happen. So just to clear the air for everybody, on a previous show I had talked about some conversations that I had with Ripley, and we were kind of going back and forth and butting heads on this issue. Now I feel that Ripley at some point may have misrepresented me. I think Ripley feels that I may have misrepresented him. And I'm all about second chances. I'm all about trying to do our best to try and get together and sit down and have a meaningful, rational conversation when it comes to any of the issues that we're going to be talking about. So which is why ultimately, for a while I didn't want to. Half the reason that I wasn't wanting to continue the discussions that I was having with Ripley on Johnny Walker Dread's YouTube channel is that I just wasn't in the right space to be able to handle the conversation, and I didn't feel like I was going to be the calm, rational person that I normally like to try and be when we're discussing the issues. So I was like, I'm just going to step back, tell Ripley to have a nice day, and just let it go. But to your credit, Ripley, you did apologize for one of the things that you did, and if I misrepresented you on anything you said, I apologize as well. I always want to make sure to represent people's arguments accurately and correctly. So again, I apologize for you as well for any misrepresentations that I might have had, and hopefully with this conversation, we can maybe work together to bridge that gap. That being said, before we get to the conversation, I do want to say one of the things that I did before this show is I made a video about where I was like, let's take a pause for a second from Kyle Rittenhouse and bring up Ahmaud Arbery. And the reason that I wanted to do that is because I kind of want to see where people, there are more than three types of people, but I think there's maybe three classes of people. People who think that Rittenhouse is guilty and or should be found guilty. Then you have people, I think, who might be undecided about Rittenhouse's guilt, and as such don't believe maybe there's enough evidence to convict, so they think he'll get off, or they think he'll be declared not guilty in court. And then I think there are people who believe that Kyle Rittenhouse is factually innocent based on the evidence that they've seen. So not enough evidence to convict, but factually innocent. So the factually innocent folks, I wanted to ask a question about the Ahmaud Arbery killing, because you had Gregory McMichael, Travis McMichael, and William Bryan, who we all saw the video, and I kind of wanted to get the opinions of the people who believe that Rittenhouse is factually innocent to see, do you believe that the Arbery killing was murder? Do you believe that, or do you believe that the McMichaels and Bryan were justified in their actions that day? And one of the reasons that I kind of wanted to specifically tie it back to you, Ripley, is that one of the arguments that was made by the defense in the I don't know whose attorney it was. I don't know if it was one of the McMichaels or if it was Bryan. Odds are it was the McMichaels because there's two of them. But they were making an argument that basically said that because Arbery was reaching for McMichael's gun, that justified McMichael in firing the gun and using deadly force, because had Arbery gotten the gun from him, it could have meant that McMichael would have his life put at risk. And so that's, to me, that is a similar argument to one that you made about why Rittenhouse should have felt free, because if you feel that Rosenbaum was literally grabbing for the gun, and now Arbery had a much firmer grab on the gun than Rosenbaum had on Rittenhouse's gun. But that's one of the reasons why I kind of wanted to connect the two and to see the opinions, to see if you believe that the McMichaels are innocent of self-defense, or innocent and it was self-defense because of Arbery's grabbing for the gun, or is there a difference between the two trials, or whatever. So I had specifically thought of you because you have made that argument. Now, I'm going to hand the ball over to you, and I'll let you talk. And because I've been talking for a few minutes now, and I try not to use the mute every once in a while, but I do want to have it be a back and forth. So if I feel like you're getting to a point where you're filibustering, I might jump in. But is there anything incorrect in how I've addressed what you've said about, because by reaching for somebody's gun, that should make it self-defense, and are there exceptions to that in the case? Is there any differences between what happened with the Arbery case and the Rittenhouse case, and where do you think I got it wrong when it came to my opinions that I stated about the ability to use deadly force simply because you're having a gun, therefore people attacking you become somehow more of a threat? Go ahead.
First of all, thank you for having me on. First off, I just got back from the dentist. I'm using a shitty phone, so if I sound lispy, that's why. But thank you for having me on.
Okay. My pleasure.
I do believe that while the Kyle Rittenhouse case, that is self-defense, I can't justify any way the McMichaels. That's definitely unlawful, definitely murder. I'm not really as familiar with that case. Not really interesting to me, but yeah, about the only thing in common between that and the Rittenhouse case is a man with a long gun having it, trying to be taken away by another man. But with that case, they were the aggressors. They were acting on information that they didn't quite have. They didn't see him go in there, so they put him in the spot where he pretty much had to do what he had to do.
Right. So see, look, we found a point of agreement. So there we go. We can agree. We agree on that. So good. I'm glad we found a point where we can agree.
All right, you kind of cut there. But,
I was letting you go on if you had any other points. So.
Yeah, I just wanted to add, I understand you not liking that rules might be different for someone with a gun, but you have to remember, when you have a gun and you put it into a situation, everything is escalated. Everything is higher stakes. Got to be really careful. That's why, like, you pepper spray me and I don't have a gun, not much I can do. But if I'm open carrying and you do try to pepper spray me, yeah, I can shoot you. There's been plenty of cases where that's happened, because if you immobilize me, you can take my gun and there's pretty much nothing I can do about it. So yes, the rules are definitely different because the stakes are different.
And see, my concern with that is simply that, and maybe I worded it inartfully. I admit I worded you can't claim self-defense if you're committing a crime blanket statement. I inartfully and inadequately represented, what should be the case, or what should have been my argument back then. And because I listened to, Johnny Walker Dredd and some of the arguments made by him and some of the people that subscribe to his channel, I altered my view because people made some points that I agreed with. So, and just kind of maybe roll it back a little bit is I feel like a lot of the things that we've done recently in this country when it comes to like rules on self-defense is that we've made it easier for people to get away with using their guns in what was traditionally an illegal way, I should say. And now I'm not trying to appeal to tradition. In that just because we did it a certain way is not an excuse to continue doing it. Appeal to tradition is a logical fallacy. But my concern is that, if we set up the rules, so like one of the things we did in this country, or we've done in this country in many states, is change how the affirmative defense of self-defense works. Where it used to be, if I raise an affirmative defense for any crime, It was my responsibility to then prove, that with a preponderance standard, that what normally would be an illegal action was a legal action, and here's why. But we've changed that in Florida, Wisconsin, Texas, other states, Georgia. We've changed that to where if you raise the affirmative defense, it's up to the prosecution to disprove that it was that it was a reasonable person, a reasonable mind, or reasonable person in a situation would have done the same thing. So I think that's dangerous in that, we're just kind of, it was already hard to convict people of any crime because of the standards of burden of proof that you have to reach for any crimes. And it just seems like we're adding on more to make it even harder for individuals to be convicted in certain situations, especially when it comes to gun crimes. One might argue, and I would probably argue, that if we have, a situation where somebody is going into a situation where they are armed, the risks clearly are there that they have the gun. They have to not only use that gun responsibly, they have to, protect that gun as well. But, if you're entering that situation, if you use the word escalation, that by somebody having a gun there, let's just say Rittenhouse, by having a gun on his body, automatically escalates the situation. And I think that could be said that's true in the people around him. If Rittenhouse is walking around without a gun, people might have not even noticed him that much, or there's just this kid walking around asking if people need a medic, if he didn't have a gun on his person at the time. But people looked at him and say, oh, well, here's this armed kid asking if people want a medic. They might have been like, oh, okay, what's up? What's the deal with this? It's, the person who might attack, maybe the person with the gun might feel that there's a bigger threat if they get the gun, but the people around that person also believe that this person is a bigger threat because they have the gun. And I just have a real problem with the idea that if we have two people, one of which is armed and one of which is not armed, and a person does an act to somebody who is unarmed that wouldn't justify deadly force, the fact that the person is armed shouldn't then justify deadly force. That's my problem with that interpretation of the law. I think that creates dangerous situations where people who have bad intentions can use that as an excuse to kill. People who it might make people, less likely to even worry about, proper force escalation techniques, because, if you can just simply claim, well, I felt he was reaching for my gun. If let's say the two people are alone, and I kill somebody, all I got to do is say I thought he was reaching for my gun, and it's now up to the prosecution to disprove that. Well, if nobody's around, how do we disprove that? You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, I got it. That's a fair point. And before I touch on that, you mind if I talk about self-defense laws, how things used to be and how they are now?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely.
So you mentioned Florida. By the way, none of the states you mentioned I've ever lived, taught, or even been to,
okay,
except maybe Georgia once. But Florida I can kind of speak to. It used to be four things that they are now is overzealous prosecutors putting people behind bars who claim self-defense. And that's why you seem to have this concept that people can just claim self-defense and boom, they can get that trial. It's not that easy. With a state like Florida, for example, if you wanted to claim, people don't understand what stand your ground is. What stand your ground is if you meet a certain standard, then you pretty much are granted immunity and you won't go before trial and be charged. People think the Zimmerman case was something like that.
Right. Zimmerman was not stand your ground. Yeah, Zimmerman was not stand your
Right.
ground. It was a self-defense case, but it wasn't stand your ground.
Yeah, the media turned in because I think from what I read, there was a Zimmerman attended a class that was like stand your ground, and they ran with that. But it's not that easy to claim self-defense and have it immediately go to court. You have to meet a standard. You have to show, I don't know what the good word for, the preponderance. You have to meet a certain standard. It's not like if you cross this line, I shoot you, I claim self-defense, and that will immediately go to trial. There have been plenty of people who have claimed self-defense, and then they end up getting charged with murder, and the trial has nothing to do with self-defense because they couldn't meet that standard. And again, if you want to look back at Florida, specifically Florida, because that's mainly what I'm familiar with out of all those states. Pre-stand your ground, overzealous prosecutors were putting people behind bars for defending themselves and other people, and that's why we have stand your ground there, or they have stand your ground there. I just wanted to bring that up. As for you talking about situations that wouldn't normally require the use of deadly force being justified due to the person carrying, they're not the same. You're trying to say, well, if a person does this, how do I explain this? They're not the same situations. When you have a gun in a situation, it's completely different. You can't compare it to anything else because having a gun is still like anything else. Things are so high stakes. And I get it. You can't just... I'm really having a hard time trying to explain this to you. I should have done more, should have wrote some notes, but...
No, I understand what you're saying with that. I do understand the general concept that, yes, it's different. It's a different situation because now you're armed. But shouldn't then there be something to be said about, maybe if you want to go into a situation and like be armed like Rittenhouse was, like the other individuals who were armed that night. If you want to go into that situation, maybe to protect yourself legally, one should maybe have to, understand, like, if I could like point to a course and say, like, look, I went to this course on when it's okay to use lethal force versus when it's not okay to use lethal force. Something else that, like, to me, if you by having a gun on your person automatically escalate it, then maybe shouldn't the person who has the gun also be required to be responsible with how to use the gun? In that, if you're going to be walking around especially in that situation where they're there to perform a task that is meant to defend whatever you're defending, and I'm just going to leave it at whatever you're defending. That maybe there should be some sort of, responsibility there that you as a person should understand those risks that come with having a gun on your person, and should also understand the force escalation. You should be able to show, like, I don't think, like, if you sat Kyle Rittenhouse down, and maybe I'm wrong about this, but if you sat Kyle Rittenhouse down and asked him what the force escalation, what's proper force escalation, what's not, I don't tend to believe that before this trial happened that he would be able to tell you when is a good one, when is a not good one. I sat in on a police course one time at a Citizens Police Academy when I lived in Kenner, Louisiana. And they did a whole bunch of things with, showing us how policing worked and certain things. And one of the things that we did was we were placed into a simulator with a working gun type thing. It only shot, like, I don't think it was a working gun. I don't think it would shoot real bullets, but it had the same functionality. It had a trigger. It would shoot some sort of other type of projectile that would hit a screen, but it wasn't at the force of a regular bullet. Anyway, and you would be put in a situation, and there would be a timer on, you know, when deadly force was hit and when it wasn't hit. And I did that course, and I always, when deadly force was called for, I nailed it right on cue. I was like, I did it exactly. Now, of course, the simulation, it can't necessarily equal real life. The real life situation is going to be much different, but through that, I was able to learn, okay, these are proper force escalation techniques. These are the things you're supposed to do in order to prevent a death from happening if you're a police officer holding a gun. And if you're a regular person holding a gun, I think maybe there's also something to be said about a requirement to also be able to understand these things and understand that. I know what the argument against that is, which is it's potentially a Second Amendment type argument, even though Scalia said in Heller that you can, in fact, have some regulations on gun control. But, you know, what are your thoughts on that? Like, is there some responsibility on gun owners to be able to should there be some responsibility on gun owners and gun carriers to be able to know these things, know how to properly defend themselves, know what proper force escalation tactics are, and knowing exactly and being able to understand, hey, this is what's going to happen. These are the added risks that come to you because you're wearing a gun. So I want to talk about it a little bit. I've filibustered a bit too long than I wanted to, but what are your thoughts?
I wouldn't make a Second Amendment argument. I don't think that's relevant, but my question would be not should they be responsible, but what is responsibility? Many people I've spoken to say that going to the right itself was not responsible. I get why people would disagree with that. I've done it. I know people who've done that. Kyle's done it. Plenty of other guys were there doing it. It depends on what you think responsibility is. I said I worked as an instructor. Met a lot of dumb people that should not have guns. We had little pamphlets that I made when I worked at an FFL, and we handed those out. It had like escalation of force, how to store firearms, etc. And what you're talking about, people do have classes for. A man by the name of Ahmaud Arbery, he's been around since 70s, and that's his bread and butter, teaching use of force, what happens when you pull the trigger on someone, and the connotations and responsibilities that come with having a firearm. One thing that we stress is that you do not put yourself in situations where you might be required to use deadly force. You win 100% of the battles that you do not get in. But when your community is burning, is it okay to put that aside and say, it's negligible? The city is burning. We can go out there and prevent it. Is that responsible? I don't know. I'd be a hypocrite for saying that it isn't, because I've done it, but that's the question.
Well, I think a lot of it may have to do just simply with how prepared one is for the situation that might occur. I mean, I don't know the background of every single person who was there with Rittenhouse that night, initially standing guard by the car sources, or if that's the correct name, I believe. You know, I'm not sure what the background of everybody was who was there. I think I'm correct in assuming that a good chunk of them probably had some former military experience. People, you know, or former maybe policing experience, you know, people who had been trained in how to deal with situations like this. Now, are there adults there who might have also not had that experience? Probably, potentially. I'm not sure. But if somebody was going to say, okay, I'm going to go and I'm going to use my experience and I'm going to use my training that I've received, either serving in law enforcement or serving in the military, and try and help my community and be able to do so in a responsible way, because I know that with my training that I will be able to handle myself in that situation. I'm not going to sit there and say, you should not be out there. I probably wouldn't go out there, but again, I also don't have that experience myself either. I think a lot can be said about the fact that I believe a lot of people failed Kyle Rittenhouse that night. I think it's clear that he wasn't ready to be in such a situation. I think it was irresponsible to send him off to the car source 3. Somebody else probably should have done that. Sending him off to car source 3, I think, was a bad idea. I think having him there, potentially there armed, might have also just simply been a bad idea as well. We all know there's the debate over whether or not it was legal for him or not to have that rifle. A lot of people haven't read the law to see how poorly written it is. My gut reaction on that, if he is going, I've said this in V Radio's chat before, earlier today, that Binger's terrible. I can't, I've looked at some of the things that that Binger did today, and it was like, what the heck are you talking about? Why are you bringing up Call of Duty? Why are you making this horribly antiquated argument that somehow video games are, making you more violent? I used to play Grand Theft Auto a bunch. It doesn't mean that I'm going to go pick up hookers on the side of the road to gain health, which was a weird mechanism in Grand Theft Auto, because why would you gain health with a hooker? You would seem more likely to get more sick with a hooker, but that's another story. But and I'm not trying to be not sex positive. Liberal Dan Radio is sex positive, and we support sex work on the show. If whatever, we feel that you should be able to do whatever you want to do with your body, but still, in the realm of the game that you were playing in, I don't understand the mechanic. But again, I'm not about to go start picking up hookers on the side of the street just because of the fact that, or start carjacking people simply because I play a stupid game. So I don't know what Binger was thinking with that. If Binger is able to get a conviction on any of these charges, if it's not tossed on mistrial, because again, Binger was stupid for bringing up the CVS video. If he's able to get a conviction on anything, it's probably the gun charge. And in my opinion, the gun charges, if he does get a conviction on the gun charge, it's likely to be tossed on appeal because of how badly written the law is. So,
am I still online?
Yeah, you're still there. You're still here.
All right. Yeah, you brought up, I'm going through a lot of points here. You brought up past experience, and that's where I will agree with you that he was failed by Ryan, Jason, everyone else. I did a tactical breakdown. Got some old info in it since the trials come out, but it's on my Twitter. Ryan, he's brave as hell. He's a really brave, charismatic guy, but god damn is he dumb. I get fog of war and everything, but he lost him and then didn't go looking for him. I give the guy credit. He's dealing with the crowd. He's running towards gunfire. After the shooting, explosives go off behind him, and he immediately turns and raises his rifle. Really brave guy, but not very smart.
Mm-hmm.
Jason, the Marine guy, I don't know if you know this, the shots that were fired after Kyle gets up, Jason was the one who did that. I'm talking to Neil from V Radio. He brought that up too. I thought I was the only one who thought that, but that's why when he said I blacked out on trial, he's pretty much covering his ass. But
mm-hmm.
Yeah, he fired those shots,
right,
which speaks to his negligence. But And thing is you can't just allow if you have a legal right to do it, you cannot say, oh, you have experience so you can go, you don't, you can't. If you have a legal right to be there, you have a legal right to do it. You can't really say anything about it.
I mean, hindsight is obviously 2020. But like, let's say, I don't think if I was 17 years old that my parents would have been okay with me going into an area where rioting was going to be happening. That being said, whatever. Hindsight's 2020. But like, he could have been there in a purely, I'm going to be a medic role. I'm going to go give first aid as possible. I'm going to try and help people out. Like I'm going to help the other people who are armed out, and the people who were, and maybe if he always would have stayed with somebody else who was armed, he could have been protected by anybody if an armed response was necessary to help to save his life or to save anybody else's life. That as long as he was with somebody else who was armed, that could have been somebody who potentially could have been the responsible person to be able to, help him do whatever he needed to do. And he could have focused on, pulling the dumpsters back from the streets, or, performing first aid, maybe being a person who could bring water to people or whatever, or just helping out without necessarily being somebody who was armed. And again, hindsight's 2020. But even with all that, to me, one of the things, and I'm going to go ahead. Let me go ahead and play my last commercial break. I'm going to put you on hold. We will come back to you after the break, as long as my mouse works. So I'm going to put you on hold for a second. I'll bring you back after the break. We'll come back and take calls as well, discuss some of the other issues that were brought up in the trial as well today. 914-803-4131. If you want to join the conversation, it's 914-803-4131. This is Liberal Dan Radio. Talk from the left. That's right.
Greetings. This is Nimbus Yosh, host of the Percy Podcast. What is the Percy Podcast? Well, it's pretty much the smoothest talking host you'll ever hear in your life, talking about all kinds of things. Political things, nerdy things, fun things, not so fun things. Go ahead, give a listen, and follow at the Percy Podcast for more updates and information. Why not sit back and take a listen to one of the best podcasts you'll ever hear, and no one else will. Catch you on the tunes.
Do you want to set money aside for a rainy day? Do you want to open an account that will give you a savings bonus each month? What if I told you that you can get both and have a chance to win $10 million? Yada is an FDIC-insured bank, and when you go to yada.liberaldan.com, open an account, and make your first deposit, you will get 100 entries into the next weekly drawing. You will also get entries each week you have a balance. So go to yada.liberaldan.com. That's YOTTA.liberaldan.com. Using gerrymandering, voter suppression, and other nefarious tactics, the Republican Party has manipulated our electoral system to maintain as much control as possible despite being a party in the minority. Liberal Dan Radio seeks to change that, and I need your help in doing so. Liberal Dan Radio has partnered with Levelfield to help us use tools that are typically only available to big money donors. When you go to stopthecoup.liberaldan.com and make your contribution, it will encourage other voters to reach out to their legislators to pass legislation to stop gerrymandering and voter suppression, and target elected officials who refuse to protect the vote. Every eligible voter should be able to cast a ballot, and that ballot should have the same power as everyone else. I can't do this alone. I need your help. So please go to stopthecoup.liberaldan.com and make your contribution today. That's stopthecoup.liberaldan.com. Stopthecoup.liberaldan.com. Political advertising paid for by Levelfield. Contributions are not tax deductible as charitable contributions. And welcome back to Liberal Dan Radio, Talk from the Left, that's right. Again, this is your host, Dan Zimmerman, coming at you from New Orleans, Louisiana. To join the conversation, it's 914-803-4131, 914-803-4131. I do have on the line Ripley from YouTube, who we've been having a good and civil conversation, and that is, I think this is the best conversation we've had so far, including text ones. I think we've managed to, to be fair with each other and to be respectful of each other, and that is a good thing. And hopefully, if that can remain the case, we will continue potentially to have such conversations in the future. So I did take you off on mute, but let me just talk about one thing real quick. I want to address something that Neil V Radio had brought up because he really wanted my opinion about what's the frickin' Zeminski. I keep wanting to say Zelensky, but it's Zeminski. I wanted to hear my information, my feelings about Zeminski and his shots in the air as it pertained to Kyle Rittenhouse's use of force against Rosenbaum. And what I find interesting, what happened today. And first of all, I was shocked that, I know there was rumors that there was rumors that perhaps they were considering putting Kyle Rittenhouse on the stand, but it's been my understanding that you typically don't do that unless you feel like you're in trouble. Like I've said on this show, don't give government any more rope than they need, any rope to try and hang you. If the police are coming up to talk to you, shut up, ask to speak to a lawyer. It's not your job to help the police do their job. Let them do their job, but you don't have to help them. Don't testify, in a trial, except unless it's absolutely like if you're losing the case miserably and you need to have the accused testify, then fine, you have to do it. But usually it's seen as the defense is in trouble when you're doing it. So a lot of people, who believe that Kyle Rittenhouse is factually innocent, were rightfully surprised and worried about the fact that they were made the decision to put him on the stand. But one of the things that we got from his testimony was that a lot of people were saying, including V Radio, if I'm getting this wrong again, you can correct me here or you can call in or whatever, that part of the thing that justified Kyle Rittenhouse using deadly force against Rosenbaum was not just the idea that they felt that Rosenbaum was reaching for the weapon and the one person who testified that a weapon was being reached for, but that Rittenhouse would have been afraid for his life because he heard the shots and couldn't have known if it was Rosenbaum who had fired those shots or not when Rittenhouse made the decision to take that first shot. Rittenhouse, to me, and I think I would think many other people would agree. If you disagree, let me know. That by Rittenhouse testified that he saw Rosenbaum's hands in the air and knew that he was not armed. So if he knew that Rosenbaum was not armed as he was closing the distance, then he would then have to have known that the shots that he heard clearly did not come from Rosenbaum. So in which case, the shots fired by Zeminski, while, maybe Zeminski should be charged for illegally discharging his weapons in a public area, I would fully support that, because that was an irresponsible use of his gun. And by all means, do it. They should do it. And if they don't do it, then, and they know that he did it, then that's, I don't know if malfeasance is the right word, but it's definitely dropping the ball on somebody who did something that should be considered a criminal action. But I think that the Zeminski point was eliminated by Rittenhouse's own testimony, which is one of the reasons why you don't want to have the defendant getting on the stand, is because prior to this, I think a lot of people believed that the Zeminski's shooting in the air could have contributed to the decision of whether or not self-defense was reasonable. And I think now that we have Rittenhouse's testimony, it's not. It's you can't now say that Zeminski's firing the gun in the air justifies.
Can I add on to this?
Absolutely, yeah. I was gonna go to you in a second, but yeah, go ahead. If you am I wrong? Do you disagree with that point?
Man.
Huh?
No, that's a bit of a straw man. Neil never claimed that Kyle potentially thought Rosenbaum was the one that fired the shot. The point is that you're being chased by a man. You have a gun. You hear a gunshot behind you. You turn around and that person is lunging for your gun. Not only would it have been justified to shoot that person had the other person not fired, because he could potentially take your gun, but now you've got to worry about the third party interfering if you were to go hands-on with that person chasing you. They didn't use this argument, but it is reasonable. If someone's chasing me, I hear a gunshot, any thought of going hands-on with the person chasing me is out the window, because I know that at any moment while I'm going hands-on with this person, that other person can come up and shoot me. Now, not only do I have to be worried about the man trying to take my gun, I have to be worried about the asshole who just popped around at me. That's what we're saying.
Okay. V Radio says in the chat, and Kyle said before he started crying, Zeminski moved on him. Yeah, I mean, Zeminski did, Rittenhouse did say that he made a step back from Zeminski, and that's when he saw Rosenbaum. Zeminski was part of that, and yes, Zeminski did have a gun. But this is what I recall, and you're saying it's a straw man, and a straw man is a lie because you're purposefully erecting an argument that you don't that you know is not true.
You're doing it intentionally.
Okay.
Probably could have worded that better. I don't think you're doing it intentionally. I think you just didn't quite understand the argument being made.
But I really recall, and it stood out in my mind because it was in the conversation today in his live stream, that when he specifically, I think, verbally asked me about my opinions about Zeminski, and that the point was made that the use of force against Rosenbaum was justified because there was no way to know whether or not it was Rosenbaum that was armed as he was charging, or if it was Rosenbaum or not that used that gun. I mean, Neil's free to correct me on if he didn't mean something like that, but that's what I got from him when I was hearing the point that was being made to me. And if people are making that point, then I think that point has been. Now, the other point that you're making, which is whether or not Rittenhouse could have gone hand to hand with Rosenbaum, and that decision could or could not be made, or could be made, or could be made. If it was one-on-one versus now you have the idea of somebody in the background who could also jump in on the fight. I mean, that's a different argument that I don't know if it's countered by that, but if you're making the argument to me, the argument by Neil was made that if there was if Rittenhouse couldn't know who had the gun, and that's why he could have assumed rightfully that it was Rosenbaum's, because he heard it but didn't see where it was. But since he admitted that he knew that Rosenbaum was not armed, then to me, okay, he says, no, that's not my argument. Zeminski was only part of the party moving Kyle. Kyle had every reason to believe Zeminski was involved in what came next. And see, that wasn't clear to me in the chat earlier today. So, and that's why I made the point. Now, one thing that I do want to say before we I don't know, we don't have to end immediately. We can continue talking for a while, but before I forget about the point that I wanted to make was where I think, if I had to make my best guess as to where Binger is going with this, where Binger might be the point he might be making with some of his arguments. Now, I'll say flat out, I don't know where he was going with many of his arguments. I don't know where he was going with the video game argument. And we had a lot of fun in the chat thinking of all the different ways that, in video games, you do things that you don't do in real life. I don't necessarily know where he was going with the semantical argument of, you intended to shoot versus intended to kill. I mean, I think I think he could have been a little more artful in wording that argument as well. That simply by knowing that if you would have made the argument, did you know that by bringing a gun and if you had to use it, you could have potentially killed somebody that night? And that probably could have been all that needed to be said, and not the beating of the dead horse that Binger did, that he did. But some of the other arguments that Binger made, and I could be wrong on this. This is just my speculation as to what maybe Binger's closing arguments might be. Where I think he's going to try and maybe, I don't know if building a cake would be the best way to describe it, or deconstructing a cake maybe would be the best way to decide it, or to describe it. But I think he's going to try and make the argument that, okay, here's the deal with the Rosenbaum killing at the very least. If you, he took 4 shots at Rosenbaum. I think that Binger may very well say, okay, well, you as the member of the jury, you have to determine whether or not Kyle Rittenhouse used deadly force, and each time that he used deadly force, was it reasonable? And if it wasn't reasonable, then it's not legal self-defense. So then I think he's going to walk them through each step, each shot that he took at Rosenbaum. I think he's going to say, okay, there may be people who maybe you believe that his first shot was not proper use of force. So then, okay, let's say there are people on the jury who believe that the first shot, the one I think that hit his hip, if I'm remembering that correctly, that maybe they believe that the first shot was justified, but was the second shot justified? Was the third shot justified? Was the fourth shot justified? I think that, that's what Binger is going to go. I think he's going to say, he's going to try and make the argument that at some point during the 4 shots that his ultimate use of force was not legal, in that because one of his shots at some point he'll say that the shots were not justified. Now I've seen people in the chat say, well, when I was taught how to use my gun, I was taught to empty the clip. And of course, Rittenhouse's argument, and it is an argument similar. When I was a freshman down here in the city of New Orleans, going to college, we would, my resident advisor, was having a conversation with what to do if you happen to be downtown and you get involved in a little bit of a kerfuffle, in a fight, if you will. And so the argument that was given to us, or the line that was given to us as freshmen who may or may not, be likely to get into a fight downtown in the French Quarter on Bourbon Street, was is if you're defending yourself by hitting somebody, what you say to the cops is that I hit him until he stopped hitting me. So what Rittenhouse said was basically something similar, whereas that he kept shooting until he felt that he was no longer in danger. And
that's what he should have said.
Well, I think that's what he did say.
That's exactly what we tell our students to do when they get to shootings. You don't say, I shot the person. You said, I defended myself. I used force until I felt it was reasonable that the threat was gone. And
I believe he did say... You
don't say, I killed someone.
Right. Well, I think he did say that. I think he said both. But I think the point that he did say, and when he said that, I was like, I think his lawyers made sure that he said that. Because clearly, you're going to have somebody taking the stand. You're going to coach him on what to say when you're taking the stand to make sure that you're not incriminating yourself. But he said what he should say, which is that I defended myself until, I felt that, my life was no longer in danger. And I think Binger is going to try and make the argument that that if you don't believe that the first shot was if you believe that the first shot was reasonable, maybe you shouldn't believe that the second shot was reasonable, and so on and so forth. And I think that's going to be the way he tries to weave the path into saying that at least one of those shots fired at Rosenbaum was not a reasonable use of force in self-defense. Now, whether or not the jury buys it or not, I mean, the way I've seen Binger run this case, I wouldn't bet money that the jury is going to buy it. Or if the jury does buy it somewhat, I don't think they're going to buy it to the degree that they would be required to convict, which is why I've said multiple times that I don't expect a conviction in this case, because of how Binger's handled it, let alone whether what you feel about whether or not you feel about whatever you feel about the facts of the case. I think the prosecution of the case has been piss poor. And I've said a lot of times, though, if without a Rosenbaum conviction, I don't think you don't get all three. I don't think you get a conviction. I think the only other way to get a conviction is an argument about Gage, however you pronounce his last name. And I'm going to get to, there's a argument going on in the chat, and I'll get to that in a second as well. But I think it's possible that he could get a conviction on maybe the weapons charge and on Gage Grosskreutz or whatever. Because of maybe the jury might buy that he shouldn't have, shot at him when his hands were up in the air, or that his hands up in the air should have shown maybe they'll believe that he was trying to surrender, but then Rittenhouse didn't accept the surrender, so therefore he had to close the gap and try and grab the gun. Maybe they'll believe that. Maybe they won't because of some inconsistencies with what Gage said. And who knows? But again, it's typically very hard to it should be hard to get a conviction in a criminal murder case anyway, because you need to be able to reach that burden of proof. And it's extremely hard to do it when your prosecutor is seemingly incompetent. And there was nothing that I was believing that the case was going to get thrown out right then and there when Binger brought up the CVS tape. Because even though I believe the CVS tape should be considered relevant, or at least the jury, I at least believe that the jury should be able to hear that, and make their own decisions as to whether or not it's relevant or not. But the judge was clear, that I'm not allowing it at this time, and I might change my mind. And when he asked Rittenhouse his opinion, or if he believed that use of force can be done in other situations, and I was like, oh no, he's bringing up CVS. Why are you such an idiot? And that is in fact what he did. And the judge got mad, and rightfully so. And if you were a conspiracy theorist, at that point in time, you might buy a conspiracy theory that maybe Binger never wanted to bring the trial, but felt that he had to because of public pressure, and now he's trying to tank it to be able to not convict the kid. Is that too much of a conspiracy theory? I don't know. But if there was an argument to be made about purposely tanking a prosecution, doing that and bringing up a video that was, the judge basically said, I don't see that this is relevant. The type of evidence that is there is not the type of evidence that can be entered, and here's why. And to bring it up anyway without asking, has the situation changed enough that I can bring this in? That was stupid if you're trying to win the case. It's not stupid if you're trying to lose the case, but I don't know. I think that might be a little bit too much of a conspiracy theory for my tastes when it comes to, whether or not Binger is trying to nuke his own case or not. Do you have any thoughts on any of that?
Yeah, I do. I don't think Kyle's going to walk on this. Despite everything I said, I think he will be convicted. I used to be very optimistic, but once Chauvin got convicted and the shady stuff that was going on with that, I do believe he should have been convicted, but he definitely didn't get a fair trial. I think there are people on the jury who have already made up their minds, and they're going to fight tooth and nail to convict this kid. So, but as far as Dinger, I would believe that conspiracy theory if he wouldn't have fought tooth and nail over everything, over him going to the bar and drinking, over him like trying to get his bail revoked and shit. Like, you wouldn't do that if you were just trying to get this case done and over with and, you know, launder it. But he's trying really hard. And you look at their faces when Gage is asked, so he only shot you once you pointed your gun at him, right? He said, yeah. Look at Dinger and Krause. They are destroyed. They are so upset. So I don't believe that this is a thing of them trying to flounder the case. I believe they're just genuinely incompetent.
Well, I did say it was too much of a. I did say it was too much of a conspiracy theory for me potentially. But if you were going to try and purposely tank it, you want to give plausible deniability that you didn't. Anyway, your next point. What was your next? I think you had a next point, or no? Did I hear that wrong?
I just wanted to ask you a few questions before I get off here.
Okay, and I have another question for you, but before you go as well, if you have time. But ask me your questions first, then I'll ask you the one because you brought something up that I want to delve deeper into.
I asked about you saying that Kyle had his finger on the trigger.
Okay.
Was walking around with his finger on the trigger. Where exactly did you get that? Because you said you saw footage of it.
I
don't mean to pull this card, but
no. I honestly expected it was coming, and I just didn't have time to go dig up the video, because I had other work that I had to do today, and I should have made time to do it because I anticipated it. All I can do is say is that I remember seeing it on one of the videos that was done probably by the guy that was following Rittenhouse and the other individual, I think. I would have to go back over the videos again and try and find the clip that I recall him having his finger on the trigger as he was walking around and not simply to the side of the trigger. So again, and you've said that I'm lying because of that, but it's not a lie. It's what I believe to be true. Now, could I possibly be incorrect in what I recall, what I remember seeing? Sure, I could be incorrect, and if I am incorrect, I'll be the first one to say what I thought I saw was incorrect, and I apologize. And I will retract the statement. But as of right now, what I recall is that there was at least some footage with him walking around with his finger on the trigger, and when I saw it, my first thought when I saw it was, that's bad trigger discipline. So it stood out enough to me for me to be able to say he's not holding his gun properly. Again, if I'm wrong, if I can't find it again, fine. But that is what I recall seeing, and I wish I could remember the exact video and the exact timestamp. I'd put it up there right now, but I don't have it at this point in time.
All right. Well, the second question, and then I'll let you ask me mine. We've talked a lot about the withdrawal. You get confused with the provocation law. You're saying Kyle should just put his hands up. That would have been done. After shooting someone, being shot at by at least two people, and a fast approaching mob coming, why would you think it would be reasonable to take your hands off the weapon that someone nearly stole from you?
This all is based off of a big if, If it is deemed that he is the person who provoked, which I don't know if they'll be able to deem that, But the argument is if it is deemed, and that's what I've said. I don't, I've usually had, typically when I've brought up the whole, issue of the duty to communicate that you are withdrawing from the fight. It usually comes with a big if, where it's like, if he's the provocateur, then he has to do this. If he's not the provocateur, then he doesn't have to do that. But, I think whether or not him being considered the provocateur by the folks, quote, on the other side, I think if they rightfully believe him, if it is shown that he illegally killed Rosenbaum, then the rest of the crowd who might have been chasing after him may very well have been justified in chasing after him and trying to make sure they didn't shoot anybody else. And clearly, if they did believe that he was a threat and he could have shot other people and they failed to do that, it's fine. But if, in order for him to then claim self-defense for the later two shootings, if it is found that he was the provocateur in the first one, then he, again, by law, is required to effectively communicate that he's withdrawing from the argument, that he's withdrawing from the fight. Or, there's an or that I don't
mean to interrupt you, but you've been talking a lot.
Okay. I tend to do that.
The statute specifically says adequate notice.
Right.
You seem to created this invention that he has to put his hands up, he has to vocalize it. I am done. I am no longer a threat. That's not what it says. It just says adequate withdrawal.
Okay, I know that. I know that's what it is. What I do when I give the examples of like raising my hands up in the air and be like, "Hey, I give up." That's an example of that I would say of one might do to give the adequate notice. Now, ultimately, if it's determined that he's a provocateur, and that he would then be required to give adequate notice before being able to claim his right of self-defense as one would normally have, then he would have to do something that would be adequate notice. I'm not saying that the only thing that he could have done was raise his hands or verbally say, "I give up." But I'm saying that may have been an example of something that he might have been able to do in order to adequately notify the people around him that he had no interest in continuing any sort of violent confrontations, that he was done fighting if they were done fighting. And at which point, had he effectively communicated that in the eyes of the jury, who would be ultimately the one deciding whether or not adequate notice was given, then he would be able to use deadly force in a simple case of deadly force. A reasonable person would then be justified in any situation where a reasonable person would be justified in using deadly force. If he doesn't give adequate notice at that point, under my understanding of the law, is that he has to exhaust every other method of solving the situation before he is able to then use deadly force. So it's a lot of ifs.
Running away, saying I'm going to the police, saying I didn't shoot anyone, not pointing your gun at anyone, running to the police, those all seem like pretty good notices. You understand what I'm saying?
I understand what you're saying. I understand that. I understand that you're saying that. We've also seen situations where over the course of the day, that Rittenhouse lied about who he was and what he was and what was going on. Does somebody saying, "I'm going to the police," mean that they actually are going to the police? You had a police officer take the stand early on the other day, I believe. I think it was the police officer that made the announcement to Rittenhouse once he reached the police line to basically just, get away, go, get out of here. I believe he said that even to him, that Rittenhouse raising his hands wasn't necessarily enough to show that he wasn't a threat, because sometimes the people who are the threat will pretend to not be the threat just to get an advantage. Whether or not a jury would come to that conclusion, whether or not the jury would say, well, if only Rittenhouse it's possible that the jury might very well say him running down the street towards the line of police cars is enough for us. And that's fine. If the jury would find that, if they're in the position where they have to determine that, then fine. That's what the jury just decides. I don't necessarily think that running, just because you're moving in a direction, that doesn't necessarily mean that's ultimately, it means that what other people might interpret it to mean. What do I mean by that? In the trial, in and of itself, we've heard from the defense. The defense made the argument that because Gage Grosskreutz, or whatever his last name is, because he was moving in the same direction as Rittenhouse, that he was somehow chasing Rittenhouse. But now,
well, he had a gun in his hand.
At some point, he did have a gun in his hand, yes. Rittenhouse didn't recognize...
Pretty early, actually.
Right, but I don't know if he had the gun in his hand when they first spoke, the only time that they spoke. I don't think the gun was in his hand at that time, if I'm recalling the situation correctly. And if it was Gage Grosskreutz intention to harm Rittenhouse, what better time to do it than when he was a foot behind him and behind him? He could have very easily harmed him at that point and didn't. But my point is that Gage Grosskreutz believed that didn't interpret what he was doing as, quote, giving chase. He was just saying that he was moving in the same direction as Rittenhouse. Now, the defense believed differently. The defense was trying to establish that he was chasing, and the reason they are doing that is because they want to help establish that it was self-defense, because this person was chasing him. On the other side of the coin, the prosecution has tried to suggest that perhaps it was Rittenhouse that was initially heading towards Rosenbaum, because he was heading in that direction. And because he was heading in that direction, and at some point running, that maybe Rosenbaum might have interpreted that movement as Rittenhouse chasing him or going after him. Now, of course, the defense disagrees with that as well. So we have, multiple situations where, people on one side of the trial interpret a motion as one thing, and on the other people on the other side of the trial determine the motion as something else. So is it possible that one could reasonably determine his running in that direction as being giving adequate notice if adequate notice is needed? Sure. Is it possible that they might not? Sure. I think it's possible that you could, the reasonableness of that, again, could be argued as well. My point is that, I've never said that this is the only way that Rittenhouse would be able to give adequate notice. I just tried to give it as an example of one way that he could. And the reason I use my hands up in the air specifically is because when Rittenhouse reaches the line of police cars, he does raise his hands and lets go of his gun to let the people who are police officers know, hey, I'm not a threat to you. That's why I bring up the raising of the hands, because that's how he let the police know that he wasn't a threat. That was his way that he did it. So if he knew how to do it that way, he could have possibly known to do it another way. Your argument of
but
why
do you know why he specifically did it that time instead of earlier on?
You're going towards the cops, and I don't know why. I'm not in Rittenhouse's head. I can't.
My point is that when you've already had someone attempt to take your gun, you've been shot at, you're being chased, people are coming towards you, you're not going to put your hands up. You're going to hold on to that rifle for dear life, and you're going to run. Once Kyle got to the police line, everyone backed off, even the police, pussies, and he put his hands up because he was in a safe position to do so, because there was nobody around him to take his rifle. It was safe.
Well, on the other hand, though, if you look at what Grosskreutz did or whatever, he did put his hands up in the air, and he still was holding onto his gun. It's possible maybe Rittenhouse could have had his hand on his gun while holding his hands up in the air, being so he didn't let go of his gun, but he still could be holding it in a way that wasn't necessarily deemed as threatening, that could have easily shifted to
that would still make him a threat, though. With Gage, people give me shit for this, but if I were in Kyle's shoes, I would have shot Gage while he had his hands up. All it takes is a little 90-degree turn of the wrist, and you can easily shoot someone with a handgun while you have your hands up.
Well,
So
and
if Kyle had his hands up while he had the gun in his hand, they would still make the argument, well, that wasn't good enough. That's what people would be saying, not you, or I don't think you would. I don't know about you, but people would make that argument.
And the other thing that Binger did bring up is the fact that, Rittenhouse, however he was holding his gun at whatever time, I mean, it's possible that Gage might have been justified in shooting earlier as well. And it's possible that if Gage would have just, instead of trying to approach, if he would have just fired when he had the opportunity to, it's possible that he could have been the one on trial, and he could have been the one, potentially not being convicted on self-defense, making the argument that here's this person who'd already shot one person. I just watched him shoot somebody else and shoot at a third person. I didn't want him shooting at anybody else, so I'm shooting him. But now one of the arguments that Gage did make, which I potentially, that his positioning of his arms and his left arm was towards, and yeah, he had the gun. A lot of the people who believe that Kyle Rittenhouse is factually innocent are saying that, yes, he admitted to having his gun in this particular direction, so that the barrel of his pistol was still pointing at Rittenhouse's head, but it wasn't in a way that one would typically hold their gun if they were going to be shooting somebody. And that's the point I think that Gage made. Now,
can I touch on that real quick?
Sure.
Actually, that is a way that you would do that. There's a specific style of shooting called a CAR, center axis relock. If you've ever seen John Wick, the way how he has his gun close into his body, shooting from retention, that's CAR. So when Gage has his gun by his hip, close to his body, that's pretty much a style of CAR. You can vary. That's a style that I used to teach. It's a style that it's very popular nowadays.
Well, I'm not talking about by his hip, though. I'm talking about when it was by his head.
Oh, yeah. Well, even then, he could still just flick his wrist down. There have been people who have been shot.
I mean, there are people who...
There are people... Kyle was firing his rifle. He was firing it like a paintball gun. The stock was underneath his arm. It wasn't in his shoulder. He was shooting from a very, very weird position, very unorthodox position.
Uh-huh.
So I don't think anyone has the right to say, oh, he didn't get proper two-hand grip on the gun, therefore he wasn't going to shoot. You don't know that.
And that is something. And that is
your direction. That's a threat.
That is something that I was also like when Binger brought up the whole, well, he didn't have two hands on it. I'm like, how many people, are going to use the two-handed grip in that situation? Like I think again that was one of his, maybe jumping the shark moments where he didn't, maybe Gage could make an argument as to why he wouldn't believe that, why if he was going to take the shot that he wouldn't do it from that position, but I think it's ridiculous for Binger to have said, well, because he wasn't holding it like this, that's not necessarily the only way that you can shoot a gun. But before you go, I know you said you wanted to head off, but before you go, the one last thing I did want to bring up, because you did mention it, about what happened with Derek Chauvin, and you said that the reason you think that Rittenhouse is going to be convicted is because Derek Chauvin was convicted. Do you believe that Derek Chauvin should not have been convicted in the death of George Floyd?
Well, I said it earlier. I do believe he should have been convicted. He got 23 years, right?
I believe so.
Yeah, I don't know if that's. I think that's a bit extreme. Like first-degree murder. I've seen first-degree murderers not get 23 years. I think he maybe should have gotten 16 at the most. But the thing with that trial is, yeah, he should have been convicted, but he deserves a fair trial, and he didn't get it. We had people on the jury saying, I made up my mind before I got on jury. Like the one guy who's constantly pimping his podcast, he even said, on his podcast, lied to get on the jury, convict these cops. He lied on his questionnaire. He made up his mind beforehand. That's what's going to happen in this trial as well. I guarantee you it. It's already happened.
But if one person and 2 persons, 3 persons can do that. I mean, I would not recommend doing that. I don't agree with that at all. I think that you should always be open to, like, I would like to think that if that I could serve in a jury on something that I've heard about and formed an opinion about, simply because I would like to think that when presented with evidence contrary to what my existing belief is, that successfully, convinces me otherwise, that I will freely be convinced. That being said, I don't know. I don't know if anybody would ever, allow Liberal Dan to be on a jury. Because I'm very opinionated. But no, I didn't hear that you said that he should have been convicted. So I apologize for that, for not getting that, hearing that properly. But I mean, even if 1 or 2 or 3 are behaving poorly, that you should, a person who is on trial should have the right to have all 12 people acting properly. But a conviction wouldn't have been reached unless all 12 vote yes. So even if 1 or 2, 3 are acting poorly, those other 9, were they acting poorly as well, or did they reach their verdict based on, the facts of the trial and what happened? And maybe we allow, we require 12 just because, even if 1 or 2 or 3 are behaving badly, then you still have to have the other 9, 10, 11 voting to convict. Now, the sentencing part is all on the judge. So the judge felt that the sentencing, I've talked about this on the podcast. I don't know. Like, I think that's not even relevant. Let's not even talk about that. But I always think that the sentencing could be adjusted downward and appeal, and I don't know if the appeals process is where they are in the appeals process on the trial, or on if they're appealing the length, the duration of the trial. It's very well possible that even if he got 23, that appeal could bring it down to something that others might find more reasonable. And it's possible that if they only gave him 16 or 10, that they still could have appealed and then brought it down even less. So maybe that's the idea of the judge, was like, I think the judge made the argument that because of the position that he was in, that made the crime more problematic than it would have been had it just been a regular citizen. But again, if that's why we have appeals courts. If the judge reached the decision on the sentencing to be improperly, incorrectly, or applied bad sentencing guidelines to this individual and his first conviction, then the appeals process should be able, or I would hope they would catch it and fix it to make the punishment fit the crime. Of course, that requires more legal time and more time being spent, but as somebody used to say,
it is what it is.
Thank you, Donald. Anyway, so do you have any other final points that you'd like to make? I know you did say you wanted to get going, but any other final points that you want to make before I let you go?
No, I'm good. I'm going to get off the line and let you guys go on with your show.
All right, well, look.
Thanks for having me on, though. Thank you.
I look, thank you for coming on, and as compared to our butting of heads on, the previous discussions on Johnny Walker Dread's channel and on Neil's chats, this was to the point where I'm glad that I made a decision to say yes, please come on and come on the show. I'm glad to have had you on so we can have this conversation in a reasonable and logical and non-emotional way. And I think it just goes to show perhaps that even when 2 people start off butting heads, that cooler heads can sometimes prevail and we can have a reasonable conversation. And even if we don't agree on things at the end of the day, we can at least have the discussion and not be disagreeable. So thank you.
Oh, can I add one more thing?
Yeah, absolutely.
I piss a lot of people off with my comments. I don't talk like that in real life. It's just the medium that I have to be hyperbolic. Like I pissed off Paul, like a logical checkmate. I think Neil, V Radio, he hates me because I'm constantly being a dick to him. I don't mean to do it. I'm just, the way I voice my disagreements on the comments is very different how I would do it in person. I love Neil, I love Paul, I love Johnny Walker Dread. Just the way I voice my grievances in the comment section is very different. You can't read tone. So I come off a lot worse than I am in person. I just want to make that clear.
Okay, and look, and I apologize. I think I made some crass comment about feeling sorry for your students. I'll apologize for that as well. Again, sometimes I can also get over the top. I've had to watch some of it recently, especially on Facebook, because Facebook has become absolutely ridiculous when it comes to what they will punish you for. So I've tried to be a little bit better by myself, but I too can also be guilty of the same thing as you are. So, but we were able to come together and have a phone conversation and have it be reasonable. And I hope this goes to show that, while, I do like having, the conservatives call in and talk and even if you're not conservative, or even people who aren't conservative, or if you disagree with me on one or more issues, that I think, I've proved, especially over the past couple of weeks, that I am somebody who will, not be partisan for the sake of partisanship. I just have beliefs that I believe in, and I'm willing to have a good conversation about those issues. So again, you're welcome to come back on the program any other time you'd like to discuss any other issue. It's very well possible that we could have a ruling by next week, if not the week after. And so we'll if that happens, we'll definitely be having another conversation to talk about what happened. See if I'm right about the closing statements about Binger. See if I'm right if Binger bungled it or not. But again, you're welcome to come back on to talk about that or any other issue you want to talk about. So thank you very much, and you have a good rest of your night.
Thanks. Have a good night.
Thank you. Bye. All right. So what I'm going to do now is, for a second, I do have my other bit that I haven't played yet, which is the Words of Redneck Wisdom, which will cause me to have a little bit of a conversation about the topics of what happened in Words of Redneck Wisdom. But I'm also going to try and quickly scan through the chat between Demonox and V Radio and see what did I miss there, I should have it. I should have this bit now as well to do with David Diggs doing "What did I miss? What did I miss?" Anyway, but if you've missed Liberal Dan Radio, if you haven't listened to Liberal Dan Radio long enough, you know that I have other Hamilton parodies going on. So maybe I'll have to come up with a "What did I miss" parody as well. But anyway, here's this week's Words of Redneck Wisdom.
And now, Words of Redneck Wisdom, brought to you by Liberal Dan Radio.
My main issue here this morning is the southern border. And as we very well know, there's been millions of illegals come in from all over the world. And it seems like the only man that's doing anything about it or trying to is Greg Abbott, the great governor of Texas. And I have tried to contact him. As you very well know, I talked to you last summer about it. And I'm still willing to go down there and work with the National Guard, but I cannot get a hold of his office. So I thought maybe you might could. And
no, I'll try. You want to go down there and help, right, Colonel?
Yeah, I mean, I'd like for him to give me a commission in the Guard and let me run a unit or battalion or a company or whatever, and
right.
To help combat this, these illegal border crossing, because this is our country. I don't like our sovereignty being broken like this. And another thing too that I don't like is that if this was Trump and he opened it up, they'd have him on trial for murder, because that's what Joe Biden is committing, because he's letting these illegals in. They got COVID, they're not checking them or anything like that. Hey, that's the same thing as murder. He's letting them in and
Right.
giving it to Americans, and Americans are dying from it. That's murder.
Yes, sir.
And this concludes Words of Redneck Wisdom, brought to you by Liberal Dan Radio. Talk from the left, that's right.
Anyway, so that was Words of Redneck Wisdom. Two things that I found odd about that one. One, the hypocrisy. The hypocrisy of the whole, this show that I got this from, which is my friend Jeff's show. They're always like, COVID, don't take COVID seriously, unless we're talking about the people who are coming across the Texas border. Then, oh my God, we have to take COVID seriously. They're going to kill people. It's murder. But, I think part of this is like, he just wants to go down and he wants to go and lead a battalion of people of the National Guard. I don't know if the National Guard has battalions, but he wants to go lead a battalion of National Guardsmen by the border. For what purpose? I mean, are you going to... To me, I want to go shoot me some Mexicans. That's what I hear. But since V Radio is still here, I did want to read something that was pertinent or related to something we talked about earlier. I'll start reading from the letter, and I think we'll all know the context at some point. I can't do the voice impression of this, nor would I try to. Now, I wanted to say something about the fact that we have lived over the last 2 or 3 summers with agony, and we have seen our cities going up in flames. And I would be the first to say that I am still committed to militant, powerful, massive nonviolence as the most potent weapon in grappling with the problem from a direct action point of view. I am absolutely convinced that a riot merely intensifies the fears of the white community while relieving the guilt. And I feel that we must always work with an effective, powerful weapon and method that brings about tangible results. But it is not enough for me to stand before you tonight and condemn riots. It would be morally irresponsible of me to do that without, at the same time, condemning the contingent, intolerable conditions that exist in our society. These conditions are the things that cause individuals to feel that they have no other alternative than to engage in violent rebellions to get attention. And I must say tonight that a riot is the language of the unheard. And what is it that America has failed to hear? It has failed to hear that the plight of the Negro poor has worsened over the last 12 or 15 years. It has failed to hear that the promises of freedom and justice have not been met. And it has failed to hear that large segments of white society are more concerned about tranquility and the status quo than about justice and humanity. Now, every year about this time, our newspapers and televisions and people generally start talking about the long, hot summer ahead. What always bothers me is that the long, hot summer has always been preceded by a long, cold winter. And the great problem is that the nation is not used its winters creatively enough to develop the program, to develop the kind of massive acts of concern that will bring about a solution to the problem. So we must still face the fact that our nation's summers of riots are caused by our nation's winters of delay. As long as justice is postponed, we always stand on the verge of these darker nights of social disruption. The question now is whether America is prepared to do something massively, affirmatively, and forthrightly about the great problem we face in the area of race, and the problem which can bring the current doom down on American civilization if it is not solved. And I would like to talk for the next few minutes, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so there you go. Yes, he maintained that rioting didn't work. And that's clear there. But he also maintains, again, he's like, look, it doesn't necessarily work but the reason why it doesn't work in his mind in this letter is it doesn't work because all it does is it makes white people more scared of black people while justifying their fear in black people. So they're like, well, we're going to continue. That's what his problem with rioting is. It's not in and of itself the problem with the riots. It's the fact that, he feels that peaceful non-violence is the best weapon to deal with the issues that are going on. But the problem with the riots is that it continues to encourage white folks to not want to find a solution. They're like, well, we don't want to find a solution because these people are just rioting. So they're justifying their fears of black people. So to quote somebody else, or to paraphrase, I would say somebody else from Boondocks. So somebody would say a question about rioting. We'll question somebody rioting. Well, Slickback would say, has not rioting got you the desired results? And you say, no, clearly not. So he would say, he would justify that, well, then maybe you should try rioting. And look, again, I'm not going to sit here and justify rioting in and of itself. It's not my place to say, look, people are fine to go riot. What I will say, though, is that when people do riot, it's because you haven't dealt with their needs. I don't want anybody to say that I'm referring to the people who are rioting as children or babies. So let me just be upfront with that, because I know people like to stir things up and make meanings of analogies that don't exist. But in a situation where you have a baby and they're hungry and you haven't fed them recently, and what they will do is they'll cry and scream. Why? Because you're not feeding them when they're not crying and screaming, so they're gonna cry and scream. So again, I'm not trying to say it's exactly the same, but if you have people that are so desperate, and we're not talking about, I don't want to say just talking about, there are systemic racial issues that are pervasive in this country. And I think that you, V-Radio, as somebody who is a Bernie Sanders supporter, somebody who has been with the Occupy movement, and somebody who, while having problems with people on the left, are yourself on the left, which, I mean, what leftist doesn't have problems with other people on the left? I mean, come on, that's almost the definition of a leftist. That being said, I kind of missed the train of thought there, but my point is that if you're sitting there, you should know, as somebody on the left, that there are these systemic issues. And one of the systemic issues is the disproportionate manner that black people are killed in this country by law enforcement. And if law enforcement is disproportionately killing black people as compared to white people, which they are, and the police are unwilling to do anything through peaceful protests about things. People tried peaceful protests like, blocking streets and making people uncomfortable whilst not doing anything, violent, but blocking a street. And by blocking the street, they hope to send a message. Oh, you're uncomfortable with this? Well, we're uncomfortable with the fact that every time we have an altercation with police, or not even altercation, every time we have an interaction with a police officer, it could very well be our last ones. And the peaceful protests don't work. In fact, when they do the peaceful protests, like blocking a street and making people just simply uncomfortable, the conservatives will argue, well, we should just run them over. And they pass laws that would pretty much allow people to run people over in the middle of a protest that's blocking a street. So if the peaceful versions of the protest, if marching down the street is not working, if writing your congressmen and writing your senators and writing your state legislators and writing people who are part of the city council doesn't work, if having a parade down the street doesn't work, if having, if having a sit-in in front of City Hall doesn't work, if blocking streets don't work, if every single nonviolent thing doesn't work, and you're still seeing black people be killed by police at a disproportionate rate, at some point, you're going to be like, well, maybe I need to try something more drastic to stop the killing. And when it comes at the end of the day, what they're protesting is the disproportionate killing of black people by police, I'm not going to sit here and say, okay, it's fine that you rioted, that you burned down a piece of property or whatever, but I'm not going to sit here and complain that the piece of property is somehow, like, I'm more concerned about the fact that of the people that are being killed by the cops. Human lives are more important than businesses. Businesses can be rebuilt. We have insurance for businesses. As was brought up in the chat today, yes, there are problems with insurance. Insurance companies are notoriously crooked. And we need to better regulate insurance companies to make sure they can't just, raise rates because you use their product. I mean, it's silly. You're going to raise my rates on a product that you're selling for me to control my risk. Of course, there are other horrible things that insurance companies do, and that's why we need, Medicare for all, and that's why we needed that's why we needed the provisions in Obamacare before we got to Medicare for all, etc. And I'm not saying let's burn everything because insurance is the strategy, but that's not their strategy, V-Radio. It's not the strategy that they're implementing. They're not... They're trying to make the point that they're trying to hit people in their dollars. They're trying to make a statement that for some reason won't be listened to any other way. Let's see, you're trying to talk about a problem that kills less people than swimming pools. I mean, swimming pools aren't a systemic issue, and swimming pools don't kill people disproportionately, and I think it's reasonable to suggest that police departments shouldn't kill people at a disproportionate rate than they do of one race than they do another. But the killing is just one of the many issues. The killing just tends to be the one that gets focused on a lot because it's death. But there are many systemic issues that are pertaining to policing. Like, when they did stop and frisk in New York, that 95% of the people that were stopped and frisked were either black or Latinx. So you have other policing issues where policing in all forms tends to be racially biased. So it's not just the killing. So it's not just affecting the people that die. And even when the people die, that doesn't just affect the people that die. It affects their families. It affects their neighborhoods. It affects the ability of black people to trust the police. If they can't trust the police, then who are they going to call? Can't call Ghostbusters. That's a fictional company. So, if you can't trust the police, then you're going to end up with people who, then you're not having the police doing what they're supposed to do, which is to catch people who commit crimes. And then we get into the whole discussion as to, what defunding the police means and whether or not we should be taking, funds away from police to handle certain things and instead let other people handle it. And that's a whole nother show. That's a whole nother thing. Let's see. If I am free, I would be happy to come on the show. I just don't know what my schedule is for this weekend at this point. Between my job, between my two kids, between a whole bunch of other stuff, But look, my email is Liberal Dan Radio, which I'm Liberal Dan Radio pretty much everywhere except for Facebook, where it's just Liberal Dan. There is also a Facebook.com/Liberal Dan Radio, but I haven't really leveraged that yet. I just reserved it. But I'm basically Liberal Dan Radio everywhere. And so you can email me, liberaldanradio@gmail.com, and let me know when you usually have the show, and I'll let you know whether or not I'm free to be able to come on or not. So I'd be happy to do that. Let's see. Demonox is calling him out for being left. There's a lot of, Demonox, I believe, would probably describe himself as more left than me. I think I'm more progressive than a lot of people give me credit for, because I'm typically more pragmatic about my progressivism, and a lot of people who are progressive are not necessarily pragmatic about it. But on issue-wise, I tend to be more leftist than I am right-wing, clearly. I do support, I'll support the Second Amendment, but I also support regulation on gun ownership, as Scalia said you can have. So I also believe that there should be regulation on gun sales, which doesn't necessarily mean on gun ownership, but that means on gun sales too. V Radio, sorry to inform you, Demonox, you don't get to determine if I am or not a leftist. And Brandon, nah, I'm judging you. I'm mad that I've missed a bunch of this because I was having a really good conversation. I was shocked. I was shocked about how good the conversation was between me and Ripley. That was a good. It was shockingly good, especially based on our previous interactions. So it's, again, more proof that we can have reasonable conversations with people who we disagree with. And maybe the chat might be an example of people who can't get along well, but that's fine. Where can you find my email? It's liberaldanradio@gmail.com. It's my same username here on YouTube, liberaldanradio. Just put @gmail.com, and there you go. I have a problem typing it in the chat. I'll just type the Liberal Dan Radio part. Liberal Dan Radio. It highlighted it. Ugh. Liberal Dan Radio, but @gmail.com. That's it. It's very easy. I'm very easy to get in contact with, I should say. Shouldn't necessarily say that I'm very easy, although I don't slut shame. I'm very sex positive here in Liberal Dan Radio. Talk from the left. That's right. Let's see. Do I have anything else to discuss with the show? I think there's just so much to scroll back on that I don't know if I could just adequately handle everything, at least in the 25 minutes. But if anybody has anything in that they would like to pose in the chat for me to answer before I go ahead and call it an end, I'd be more than happy to do so. We're almost at a 3-hour show today. A 3-hour show. But I do, again, if you've listened this far, listened this long, and you've paid attention, and I do appreciate you listening. And I do want to, encourage 2 things, or 3 things. First of all, make sure to do everything you should be doing on YouTube. Like the video, like this video, share my videos that you like, or even if you dislike, say, look at this. If you disagree with some of the things I say, share my video and say, look at what this quack believes, and get them traffic to my site, because, then maybe you still might be able to say, okay, well, maybe we disagree with this guy, but this guy is reasonable and somebody who we can have an intellectual conversation with. But also remember to subscribe to the channel as well. I'm trying to get more subscriptions. I would love. I know V Radio has had some problems. He mentioned it with monetization, and YouTube's monetization policies have been a little bit wackadoodle ever since they made the change and threw the baby out with the bathwater. Because there was a time point I actually made $100 on YouTube on one video, made me $100, and then they changed the rules, and I can't make money again until I can get the full 1,000 people and a whole bunch of other views. But wait, I'm sorry. Oh wait, but I did want to play the song. Now look, I do promise I do need to go, and thank you, V Radio, for joining us in the chat room. Have a good day. I do need to go watch your video about critical race theory, but I did also want to, speaking of critical race theory, I wanted to give this a shout out again. Pink.Williams on TikTok. This is his song.
If you don't want your kids to learn about the evil stuff that our founding fathers did, and you say you've had enough of the left indoctrinating kids when they go off to school, you're nothing but another propaganda spreading fool. Our nation's evil history is not up for debate, and you can't ignore the facts just because you're full of hate. So let me tell you something you can do to simmer down. Read a goddamn history book, you racist right-wing clown.
Huzzah. So I love that, and I'll probably play that a bunch since then. It just happens to give me good feelings down in the cockles.
It's called science.
That's what happens. It's called science, science. What Donald Trump embraces, fully, with the injecting of disinfectants into your body and all that other fun stuff. Something I found interesting is that Trump was all about the remdesivir, was it? And he bragged about the ventilators and being able to get all these ventilators. And now conservatives hate remdesivir and the ventilators. Like they put my friend on remdesivir and he died, or they put my and I know your radio. I think your video specifically deals with one individual person, so it's possible, maybe, and I'll watch it, and I could be wrong on it, but the video on critical race theory, I might come out saying this person is an a-hole, but it doesn't stop me from believing that our nation's history should be taught completely. Anyway, but back to the thing. It's like, I'm so confused as to conservatives who like want to make the argument that going on a ventilator is bad. Like, the ventilator causes your death, is what they'll say. Like, you'll never put me on a ventilator. I'd rather not go to the hospital because I don't want to be put on a ventilator. Well, then you're probably going to die then too. Because it's not the fact that you're on the ventilator that's the problem. It's the fact that you needed a ventilator that's the problem. That your situation got so drastic that you needed a ventilator to try and help save your life. But this is the way that conservatives think, is that they say, oh, well, if you have, if you're on a ventilator, you're more likely to die, so it's the ventilator that's killing you. What was it? One of the arguments that some conservative person said the other day, speaking of conservatives, where's Bringing It Boy? He wasn't here at all today. What happened? It's crazy. Anyway, if the count, why is it that the blue counties are the counties that are more likely to be counting their ballots later? And that just shows that it's fraudulent. They can't run their systems. Well, maybe the blue counties take a while longer to run because there's more votes to count in the blue counties. Like, a red county with 3,000 people is going to be much shorter to count votes in than a blue county with 1 million. Come on, do better.
It's called science.
I know, Donald. That's at least what they believe science is. Let's see. So I'm not going to get into CRT this week as much as I should, although I like the song. But what should I do? The other should I do my other song? Where is it?
Dog, down here in Liberal Dance Chopper City, we got some steals on Harley Davidsons today. Turns out holding Sturgis wasn't that bright of an idea, but while festival goers pass away, we're passing on the savings to you. All our Harleys come freshly sanitized for your riding comfort, and while supplies last, we're throwing in some antibacterial gel and a 12-pack of 2-ply, just in case the stores run out again. So come on down to Liberal Dance Chopper City and get you a hog today. Liberal Dance Chopper City is a fictional establishment, and we don't know what the death toll of Sturgis will be.
I guess it's kind of old because at this point maybe we do know what Sturgis did, but I just had such a good time making that I want to beat it for everything that he has. I don't know. Since this is the Rittenhouse episode, I have a something here that's marked 00000. It's marked Rittenhouse. So what is this again?
It looks like one of them has a weapon.
Oh, that's the CVS audio. Yeah, so that's the inadmissible audio that or the video that that the Binger was prohibited from bringing up, but yet he brought up anyway because he's a stupid idiot, as Chris Jericho from wrestling might say. But anyway, shouts out to if you ever watched WCW wrestling back in the NWO days, apparently Judy Bagwell died, Buff Bagwell's mom. I'm pretty sure it's the main, I think it's his real mom, but I don't know. But thoughts and prayers to you. I still do watch wrestling occasionally, and I have my nerdydan.com stuff that I do as well. And I've been trying to do some videos pertaining to that on top of everything. I was going to make there's a video that I've been wanting to make for a while for my nerdydan.com channel, and unfortunately I just haven't had the time to do it on any day. So, and I was thinking that I might do it tonight, but instead I decided to do a 3-hour show. There's an interesting topic I guess we could maybe discuss for a little bit, is the fact that desegregation being bad. And is desegregation in and of itself bad? It's I think we all benefit from having diverse populations in our schools. I think one of the things that Joe Biden did, early on in his political career that a lot of people disagreed with now, in hindsight, is the fact that he opposed busing, and the reason he opposed busing, as stated back then, was for the wrong reasons. But busing can be in and of itself very problematic if you're spending so much time having people be on buses to bring them to the quote good schools. Then they have less time to do homework, they have less time to do extracurriculars, they have less time to do many other things. So therefore that can be one of the problems that takes place when you have desegregation and it's done improperly. When you could do things like change the systemic racism that comes with the funding of schools based off of property taxes, and instead fully fund all schools regardless of what the neighborhood is like, and therefore you don't have to worry about whether or not the school is a good school or a bad school, because all of the schools could then be adequate schools at the very least, even if you might have some that achieve more than others. And as such, and me and Deminox on same wavelength, because as I was saying that, he says ultimately the way redlining works and the way schools get funded, it hurt. And again, this is why me and Deminox get along so well, is because a lot of times we end up coming to the same conclusions similarly. We are often on Nimbus Yosh's page on Facebook. We are often, just beating the other one out on making a funny comment on the same either the same or at least similar funny comment on one of his statuses, and we'll often be like, "Oh, you beat me to it." Shouts out to my little brother, the host of the most Nimbus Yosh, with the smooth sounds of the Percy podcast. Here's hoping more episodes get rolled out. I think he's been having a little tough go of it, but again, you can support the smooth sounds of the Percy podcast over on Anchor. So give him a check out as well. Again, more shouts out to Deminox, the first Liberal Dan Radio patron, also to Cesar out in California, and your boy Chris here in Louisiana as well. Very much thankful for all of y'all's support. Even when some of y'all, I would understand any of the people, if you're having financial difficulties, if you stopped being a Patreon because of that, that's fine. But I do appreciate the fact that y'all do support me in the ways that you do in the other ways as well. But yeah, so let's see. Ultimately, the way redlining works is the way schools get funded hurts, and leftists would know that. So let's see. I need to move my setup to another room because I'm like 5 months without an episode. Come on, man. You need to get an episode out. Roll it out the door. Use your phone. I remember a couple of times I've only more recently on Anchor have I been using my computer for it. I've used my phone for my Anchor podcast, and it comes out pretty decent. It actually, for a while, I was doing the Anchor podcast on my phone because my phone was better than the microphone on my phone would record my Anchor podcast better than the microphone on my computer. Fortunately, I was able to spend a little extra money and get a nicer microphone. So I could have the smooth sounds of the Liberal Dan podcast, which may not be as smooth as the smooth sounds of the Percy podcast, but still, I'm told I have a good voice for radio. Hopefully not too many people tell me that I have a face for radio, but at least nobody tells me that I have a voice for print. But I don't even have a headphone jack really on my phone. I don't even use the headphone jack. I just hold the phone like this, and I'll be like, record, blah, 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 blah. And I just hold it like this. And there you go. That's how I do it. So that is how I do it. It was funny. Like there was a couple of times when I was driving, doing Uber and Lyft and stuff like that. And people would be like, you have a really great voice. You should be on the radio. And I'll be like, I am on the radio. I'm Liberal Dan Radio. Talk from the left. That's right. And they were like, wow. And I'd be impressed that they would actually, be able to say that I should be on the radio. And, it's awesome that they think that. It's just, I would love to be able to, make this into a much bigger thing than what it is. Which is why you need to go to patreon.liberaldan.com and support the show today. And you need to go to stopthecoup.liberaldan.com and support I would love to be able to put my first billboard out. Whatever it costs to make the first billboard, I would love to be able to raise enough money to get my first billboard out. Wherever it might go, I want to do it. It would be awesome if we could do it. We'll see if we can. Let's see, to suggest that desegregation, blah, blah, blah. Maybe this is why I don't have a full-time radio show, because sometimes I start going blah, blah, blah. Let's see. 40 minutes into talking and it stopped after 7 minutes. That's not good. Although, I think you can only do 30-minute segments at a time on Anchor. Let's see. But here, V Radio says, to suggest that desegregation did something wrong or bad to people of color is ludicrous. It's not that desegregation in and of itself was the problem. It was the surrounding problems that was the problem. It's like a lot of times, like when they talk about like affirmative action, like even back in the day, like people discuss like affirmative action, be like, oh, we don't need affirmative action anymore. I was like, the problem with affirmative action was not affirmative action. The problem with affirmative action was the fact that it wasn't tied with other things that would help to get rid of the racial disparities that exist in our country, such that you don't need affirmative action in the future. But yeah, and to say that, we have problems, like, again, if we have problems with desegregation, it's, or with how desegregation was implemented, it's not that we take issue with the fact, again, when I was looking for schools for my kid, because New Orleans is 100% charter, so we get to try and pick what school we want and hope we get it, because never go full charter. It's ridiculous. But one of the things that we looked at was, I wanted my son to be in a diverse setting. Like I didn't want him to be the only white kid, but I didn't want him to be in just a bunch of white kids either. I wanted him to have diverse, and one of the reasons that I like the school that he's at is the fact that there is a large diverse cultures, and he gets to learn about them because they make it an important, the important thing about learning about other cultures, and he gets to learn Spanish. And my oldest one is also learning Chinese on top of the Spanish that he's already learning. It's one of his favorite classes is, I think, the Mandarin class that he's learning. So having diversity is a very good thing. But one of the problems with the charter school model that we have here, which is kind of a desegregated model, except for the fact that you end up having parents who, if you're poor and you're a parent, you can't, you don't have the time or the effort or the knowledge to be able to navigate the system. Your kids winds up getting stuck at a school that you might not want them at. And then you might have to, again, bus them across the district, for like an hour bus ride just to get to school, or an hour more on the bus each way, simply because you couldn't get your neighborhood school. When instead, you should have fixed redlining problems, make sure that communities could get developed equally, and make sure that the funds are there to make sure that every school has the funding it needs to be able to do what it needs to do to educate their kids properly. And all right, I will respond to your email. If not tonight, I'll do it sometime tomorrow. I'm definitely looking forward to that as well. Again, I do want to make sure, just to touch on the last, since we're already at 2 hours and 53 minutes, I just go ahead and use the last 6.5 minutes, or at least 5.5 minutes, and just go back over the Stop the Coup. Stopthecoup.liberaldan.com. I've gotten up to the 5 seat states. So I've done the seats with 1 seat, which you can't gerrymander at the congressional level with 1 seat because that's impossible. 2 seats, 3 seats, 4 seats, and 5 seats. Those are the states that have done so far. If you go watch the Stop the Coup.Liberal Day, this video series, First Stopping the Coup, there's 2 different playlists that it's on. It's also gerrymandering by state or whatever it's called. You go to either one of those playlists and just watch from the beginning, and you'll be able to see the work that I put into it. And I think you'll see that I'll be, later, V-Radio, you'll see that I've been fair in how I've addressed the issues. Now, I kind of, at the end, I know what the spoiler alert, I know how it ends, and I think we all kind of know how it ends because I've kind of hinted at the fact that the Republican Party nationwide benefits from gerrymandering in this country more than the Democrats do. But again, it's not to say that individual states don't do it. Like, to give one example, or I guess from the last video with the five states, the 5-seat states. You had Oregon, which is going from 5 to 6, but you had 4 seats to 1 seat, 4 seats Democrats to 1 seat Democrats, when it should be 3 to 2. So that's one issue, but Oregon was weird in that, but you had Connecticut versus Oklahoma. So Connecticut has 5 seats, and all 5 of them are Democrats. Oklahoma has 5 seats. All 5 of them are Republicans. So yes, they do offset each other, because each of them, if you look at how they voted in the presidential elections, each of them should have 3 seats going to the majority party and 2 seats going to the minority party. Connecticut should have 3 Democrat, 2 Republican. Oklahoma should have 3 Republican, 2 Democrats. But here's the thing, they don't. So they offset. So at the nationwide level, neither party benefits because both of them offset each other. But at the individual state level, the Republicans in Connecticut and the Democrats in Nebraska, Oklahoma, I mean, don't have any representation in Congress to speak for them. And that's wrong. And it's wrong that it happens in Connecticut, and it's wrong that it happens in Oklahoma. For some reason, want to confusing Oklahoma and Nebraska for whatever reason, probably because they're both red states. But the thing is that, again, now in Connecticut, if you watch the video, you'll see why it would be hard to draw those lines. But even so, you should be able to squeak 1 out, if not 2. It's just a matter of, but when you gerrymander, and your gerrymandering process doesn't give the minority party enough say. Now, Connecticut does give their minority party more say than Oklahoma does. But when you don't give your minority party enough say in drawing those lines, they don't get a say at all, and so you get to steal all the seats. But that's wrong, and I will continue to discuss why it's wrong. Let's see. Yes, you're right on that, Demonox. But anyway, just need to find the last. There it is. Before we get to the point because we only have a couple minutes left. But again, so I'm going to be continuing this process of looking at each states. The next video, you only have 2 states that had 6 seats in 2020, Kentucky and Louisiana. And I live in Louisiana. But then you have Colorado, Alabama, and South Carolina for 7. So I might do the 6s and 7s. Maybe that's crazy to just do the 6s and 7s. But maybe I'm just all 6s and 7s. You never know. If you watched Austin Powers or know, you know what you get it. But maybe I'll do the 6s and 7s together, or maybe I won't. Who knows? But 2 in a video seems to be kind of short for as small as Kentucky and Louisiana tend to be. However, they'll be coming up maybe at some point over the weekend, maybe sometime, maybe next Tuesday. Maybe I just always make sure to push one out every Tuesday. But I'm trying to get them all out because I want to be able to make sure to have this entire series available so that people can look at all of the videos, and then I can give just a summary video to say, hey, too long, didn't watch. Here's the goal. And then I have other things to talk about, like those states that increase or decrease, the effect of the Senate, the effect of, maybe states that put too many people in one district, and therefore making the districts unfairly drawn as well, thus giving people working to put more people into having power than they should. And that's what gerrymandering ultimately does. It affects power, and I think gerrymandering disenfranchises many, many, many more voters than anything that would be solved by a voter ID. And that brings us to the end of this week's episode of Liberal Dan Radio, Talk from the Left. That's right. We did a 3-hour show. Join us next Wednesday, 8 p.m. Central, blogtalkradio.com/liberaldan, or here on YouTube, Liberal Dan Radio. Follow me on Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, all that good noise. Remember to support, again, stopthecoup.liberaldan.com, and support the Patreon as well, so I could maybe do this for a living and be able to bring more good content and less good English to the internet. Anyway, till next week, this is Dan Zimmerman with Liberal Dan Radio. Talk from the left. That's right.
"90 seconds." Thank you for using Blog Talk Radio. Goodbye.